According to legend, the spirit of the master of stupidity, the truth of the world, passed on to the world of martial arts and was on the verge of reaching the top, was in search of someone who would follow our great mission. Previously, it was considered a stupid fairy tale, but in this situation, he thought that now he believes in this stupid fairy tale. He also believed in the next lava of the fire dragon sect, Baek Xia-yun, who obtained this place after a bloody battle. He destroyed absolutely everyone who stood in his way, considering them his enemies. There was also another warrior who survived who took part in this battle. It was the 12th generation master ghost swordsman Tak Mung who turned everything around into one continuous bloody field. He was ready to avenge the murder of innocent warriors, and also to avenge the chaos caused. In this battle, the spirit from the ancient legend chose him so that he could resist this force. And he also chose him because he believed that he would be the one who would be able to rise to the top of the world. When this battle ended and he left with victory, he understood that this is exactly how it should have been. But everything turned out completely differently because he encountered an obstacle. He did not understand why they stopped sending him this particular question. He went to the head of the sect. The sect leader sat in a huge chair. He was the leader of the Fire Dragon sect and the leader of the Blood Demon sect, Baek Xia-yun. The young man entered the hall where the head of the sect was sitting and shouted loudly that they had finally succeeded. He held a flask of liquid in one hand and a leash in the other hand, which was attached to the neck of a guy standing on all fours. The young man told the head of the sect that this was the first survivor of the immortality experiment, and he was now right in front of the head of the sect. This guy standing on all fours was a freak himself, who tried to make sounds. He hissed that he would never forgive those who destroyed his family. The young man pulled the leash and ordered him to shut up. The guy on all fours was just a freak. Instead of teeth, he had fangs, and his whole face was covered in scars. The young man got so angry that he started yelling at this freak that no one gave him the right to vote. The young man began to report to the head of the clan that this freak could speak, unlike all the others they experimented on. And the young man also added that this creature can live for several weeks without a single drop of water. The head of the sect said that he was pleased. Then he added that he had been waiting for many years to achieve results, at which point he stopped and started coughing. But he never got the result because they created some kind of monster, and he added that fools like this young man will never reach the true summit. The young man took a step back and began to beg for mercy. He asked for a little more time. He convinced the head of the sect that he would succeed with this experiment, but the head of the sect did not hear him at all. He walked and coughed loudly. Unexpectedly for himself, the young man's hands stopped obeying him. He opened the flask he had brought, and he began to drink from it. He did not understand what was happening to him. His hands did not obey at all and moved on their own. After he drank all the contents of this flask, he dropped it on the floor. Instantly, the young man's body began to turn into the body of a monster. Instead of 2 eyes, he had 10 eyes and 1 more head. He asked for mercy, but it was too late. For some time, the young man screamed and asked the master to spare him and not kill him. The head of the sect did not see any of this and did not want to hear it. He went to the wall, continuing to cough. His hands were all covered in blood. The head of the sect looked at his bloody hands and thought of only one thing. Why is there no answer? He stood looking at the sky and thought that he knew perfectly well what else was inside his life. The head of the sect was slowly dying. He wanted only one thing, to be told the secret of immortality. He wanted to see the physical technique of eternal life. At that moment, he heard a voice that told him that it was very stupid to ask for this, because in fact, the immortal body already exists. And this body is not his body at all, and it will never become his body. Behind him stood the same monster that he had just ignored, and that was the immortal body. The head of the sect turned his head, and when he saw this monster, he thought, is this really true? He didn't want to believe it. And he was also very surprised that they didn't choose him at all. He heard how this monster said that he would curse everyone in hell. The head of the sect thought of only one thing, that after everything he had achieved and fulfilled the great mission, he had actually been betrayed. In fact, even after completing the great mission, everyone was very sorry that he was never able to see the truth of the world, and at that moment, he was shown the truth of the world. She was very different from what he really wanted to see. He was very weak and could not resist even what he saw at that moment. He was exhausted and therefore fell. The head of the sect said that if this is the truth of the world, and if he is so weak that he cannot accept it, he looked at his bloody hands. At that moment, blood splashed in all directions. It seemed like a bloody fountain. The old man was lying in a pool of blood. Next to the old man's bloody department sat a freak whose hands were covered in blood. He hated this world for killing his family, and he decided that he had to take care of everything himself. At that moment when all this happened, a bloody spirit came out of the palace. The soldiers did not understand what it was. They did not look up and could not move. After which they rushed to the master, but it was too late. Their master lay motionless in a pool of blood. When the warriors saw this, they realized that their masters had been killed and decided to kill this freak. This rod rose to its feet, but red smoke continued to come out of its head. In return, he will receive all the strongholds of the world. The freak stood and looked at these warriors. And he will also gain strength despite his appearance and his capabilities. He will get all this so that the power is not his. No one will remain. The warriors were afraid to approach him. He lay on the battlefield with his eyes closed. It seemed that he was already dead. Well, in fact, all this was not at all like that. Despite everything, he will again go to the very top. To do this, he will need to go through this entire journey again. In a house that was in the middle of the forest, a family went out to see their father off. They told him to take care of himself and wanted to say that he would be back soon. Immediately after these words, the father turned around and walked along the ramp through the forest. He had a long way to go. He understood that he would have to walk all night. Only the moon lit his way. Towards morning, he approached the house. Climbing the steps, he approached the place where he was going. Come closer, he opened the door. A little light fell into the room. He took a step inside. When he went inside, he looked around. He was interested in who else was there. Seeing several people, he hurried to approach them closer. There were several people standing in front of him. When he approached, he said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Among these people was the first king, Yukbi. His face was scarred. He greeted the old man. Also among them was the northern empress Jin Sol-hee. She wondered what all this meant. Was this old man also called? Also present was the Shaolin monk, Abbot Hai-yen, who thought nothing of it and only greeted him. The huge man standing in the middle said that he was Baek Mu-ren, the leader of the Fire Dragon sect, the Great Sword Emperor. Then he raised his head and told the old man that he hoped he would have a good chew here. The old man lifted his hat and said that he was satisfied with this useless chatter, and then added that if they thought that he would not notice that spies had been watching him since he left the world of martial arts. The old man asked them to explain as soon as possible why they brought him here. The head of the sect said that he would skip the formalities and get straight to the point. He began to say that Wudong Chonghan Huashan and countless other famous sects, they were destroyed by one fighter. They know nothing about his motives and why he does it. But when confronted with him, they say that he is a demon obsessed with battles. At that moment, this one fighter was heading straight to the place where the 5 leaders had gathered. Everyone gathered thought that on this day they intended to put an end to all this madness. He is yours. He was standing right on the threshold. He took a few steps, opened the door loudly, and went inside. He said that he followed the trail of the strongest energy and it was very easy for him. Then this warrior added that he came to a place familiar to him. He was approaching them. They say that 5 leaders gathered together. It seems that absolutely everyone was waiting for this moment. They realized that it was him. The old man caught himself thinking that this warrior was not called a crazy demon for nothing, judging by his behavior. He was not just neodymium, he was desperate and left nothing alive in his path. The old man caught himself thinking that he had the feeling that the god of death was standing in front of him. The old man couldn't just stand aside, so he took up his blade. He was forced to do it. Everyone wondered if it would be enough for him to have the old man take up his sword again. It's yours, he was a little surprised because he saw the sword of heavenly grace, but nothing more. When the old man swung, he immediately damaged this bath so that he didn't even have time to resist. This was the first blow of the heavenly swordsman, and he achieved his goal with this blow. The old man swung again to deliver another blow and finish off this warrior once and for all. After delivering this blow, he put his sword back, believing that the deed was done. Everyone else thought the same. They saw their uninvited guest lying on the ground defeated. One of the strongest told the old man to relax a little because it would be really boring if it all ended so quickly. Then he added that he did say that all this talk about a crazy demon was just nonsense and that he doesn't really exist. Then he raised his eyes and looked at this warrior and thought what kind of reaction this was. He was very surprised. Here, whom they called monsters, answered them that it exceeded all his expectations. They couldn't take their eyes off him. They had never seen anything like this in their lives and didn't understand what was happening. But they didn't watch how he, despite the fatal wound, moved and smoke came out of his body. They wanted to know what was going on. They watched as his body was renewed and became the same as before. One of those in the room said, "Did he imagine it? It couldn't have happened." The head of the sect also thought that this couldn't be, but he saw it all with his own eyes. He understood that this was the legendary martial art of immortality. He had never seen it anywhere before. It was a physical technique of immortality that was happening before their eyes, and they were all very surprised. None of them could even think that this physical technique of immortality exists. The warrior they considered a monster when he renewed his body asked them how they liked it and whether they thought it was impressive. Then he took the sword in his hand and said that now it was his time to have fun. One of those present shouted at Stalin what he was doing. He wanted him to retreat. But in reality, it was already too late. This war demon struck the old man and took a few more steps forward. He told these people not to worry about the old man anymore because it was too late to worry. His eyes were fiery red, the color of blood. The old man fell and looked at his bloody hand. Then the old man fell to his knees, right in a pool of blood. Blood was pouring from his body. He was no longer a tenant, this warrior said that he had already cut the old man. Then the old man passed out and fell right into this pool of blood. This war demon took a few steps forward and asked who was next. The girl looked at Baek-mu-ren and asked him to calm down. She wanted to know if he, as the head of the Fire Dragon sect, didn't know anything about this guy. To which he replied that he couldn't say for sure, but he had read about this martial art in books. Everyone stood and looked at the old man lying on the floor in a pool of his own blood and understood that he could not do anything to this guy. The first King Yukbi didn't like this at all. He thought that he needed to be punished and that it couldn't be left like this. Baek-mu-ren thought that this was a very large destructive energy. He grabbed the handle of his sword. The first King Yukbi could not hold back and took a step forward. He could not leave it unpunished. He had to take revenge. Everyone was shouting at him to stop and wait a bit, but he wasn't going to listen to anyone. He shouted at this so-called demon warrior that he was a shameless boy and he had no right to act like that. Then he swung to strike and shouted that he would finish him off with one blow. The first King Yukbi was actually a king of punches, so all he had to do was throw what he thought was a few punches, and that guy would be finished. He used an explosive fist storm to destroy this guy once and for all. Despite the force of the blow, this guy holding a broken sword in his hand said that less was not expected from him. The force of the blow was so great that everything around was flying apart and breaking. After such a blow, it was almost impossible to survive. The force of the first King Yukbi's blow was so great that it destroyed everything in its path. The head of the sect thought that this was the martial art of the King of Blows, and after it, there is practically no chance of survival. What they saw next couldn't be explained in any way. It was incredible, but it was so. At some point, they didn't even believe that this guy could be defeated so easily with an attack of the first King Yukbi's striking power. First King Yukbi thought at that moment that his explosive fist storm had hit this guy right on the head. Well, what he saw was not explained in any way. His strength after this explosive fist storm only increased, and he became even stronger. This guy said that he admits that King Yukbi has excellent martial arts, but nothing more. That's why he added that he would accept it with dignity and in no other way. Yukbi looked at this guy and caught himself thinking that this energy that was in him reminded him of something. This warrior also attacked with an explosive fist attack similar to what he had just attacked himself with. The first king thought that this could not be, but it was exactly like that. He took over his strength and martial art from him. Unexpectedly for the first king, Abbot He-yon entered the battle. The first king looked at him. For him, it was unexpected. This guy who was a war demon told Abbot He-yon that it was not his turn, and he had entered the battle in vain. Abbot He-yon couldn't help but tell the guy to stop showing off and calm down. The enemy laughed loudly. He was even surprised that they were addressing him like that. He looked at Abbot He-yon and said to him, "Isn't it he who can barely stand on his feet?" The first King Yukbi asked the old man for forgiveness because it was all because of him. Abbot He-yon told him not to say that. If he hadn't entered the battle first, he would have done it himself. And then he added that they needed to deal with this monster as quickly as possible, and then they would think about trifles. This monster didn't want to hear anything like that about himself, so every word threw him off balance. He thought that the old man's body could exhibit the art of the King of Blows that he had just received. He pounced on Abbot He-yon in the hopes of understanding whether his body was indestructible or whether he could destroy it. At that moment, Hanyena intervened. She said that it was enough to fool around, and she took out her sword. It was Hanyon's ice sword. She swung it and struck at that monster, trying to freeze it. This monster couldn't strike Abbot He-yon because his arm couldn't move. It was frozen. The monster told them that this was the martial art of the ice palace of the Northern Sea that he had only heard about and never seen before. She told him to shut his mouth. The monster laughed very hard because the cold had frozen him to the bone, but that didn't mean anything yet. He told them that here he met 5 great masters, each of whom had reached the heights of their art. They all live up to their names, they all have martial arts that have reached the top, and he likes it. The head of the sect said that he was very glad that he liked it, after which he took out his sword. He then added that he would allow him to witness the martial arts of the Fire Dragon sect leader and swung his arm to strike. The blow reached the target and he cut the monster's body exactly in half. The monsters couldn't move because his body was frozen. He couldn't feel anything. He didn't understand what was happening. He made an effort and asked what was wrong with him. He didn't like it at all. The head of the sect said that he would be forever locked in darkness and he would never see the light again. After which the monster began to recover. He said that it was all nonsense that they were talking and took a few steps. But despite this confidence, the monster felt as if his body was being held back by something. He asked again what it was and why he was limited in his movements. He wanted to know what they did to him because he could hardly move anymore. His body was covered in something. This monster, when he could still see something, thought that he was not so omnipotent, and his body began to lose its strength. He became less and less like a very pathetic little child who had no strength at all, and who had a very hard time breathing and moving. He didn't look like the monster he did a few minutes ago. Everyone stood and watched what was happening to this guy who was a monster just a few minutes ago. Abbot Heon approached the head of the sect. He wanted to know what he had done to him. He asked because he had never seen such a martial art, and he wanted to know what he had just done. The sect leader replied that this eclipsing blade is a treasure passed down by the leader of the Fire Dragon sect. Then he added that those who fell under this blade say they spend eternity in the dark. He also added that there is no record of his actions, so he tried to see if this is really the case. He added that they don't know what will happen next, and they need to be prepared for anything. This monster continued to stand in this position for quite a long time, and the legend about it was passed from mouth to mouth. It stood for so long that after 3,000 years, nothing happened, and it continued to be in the same state. Time passed and the world and technology changed, but he was under surveillance and continued to stand. In just 2,600 years, a very important cargo was supposed to arrive on the planet GSP in the third zone. All the workers were greeted by Mark. He was from the promotion team. He was one of the people who led the process. So he asked everyone to be very careful because some of the installations are very fragile. When he approached, they asked him if he came alone or with someone. The young man replied that he was not alone today. He turned his head and said that she was with him, and she was walking behind him. It was Mark from the Earth Advancement Team. He didn't understand where she went and didn't say anything. The girl was a little late. She was really walking behind. You just had to wait. She took off her glasses because they only got in her way. There was no bright light here. The girl thought that they finally got to this fucking planet. It was the team leader of the Earth Advancement Team. Her name was Lena. Mark turned and shouted, "Team leader Lena." The girl stopped and looked at him. She asked him if he really came here to have fun and why he called her like that. The young man replied that they had nothing special to do until the team arrived. Wasn't that so? The girl replied that he was just an ordinary impudent fellow. The young man told her that, by the way, he did not expect that she would agree to take part in this. She did not understand what he meant. He tried to explain that she usually shudders at the thought of aliens. And here a friend decided to go to a place where aliens usually gather. Is it really just curiosity? He said that there are creatures here that are unlikely to be found on Earth. And they walked past these creatures. The girl told him to stop fooling around. It was still dangerous. The young man told her that everything was different now. He tried to explain to her that during the tournament that will take place, everyone is on the same level. Lena asked the young man again. She was interested and they thought so. And she thought that these creatures that were around were very smug and she definitely didn't like them. Mark laughed and said that he didn't think so. The girl looked at the young man and it was very strange for her. So she unexpectedly told him that she had enough and he should stand in the exhibition hall. The young man did not understand why she did this. Lena told him that it was enough to get on her nerves. If he wanted to stand among these creepy aliens, then let him stand there. The young man answered her that if they are in the same boat here, then it is very dangerous for her to make such comments. He thought it was dangerous only because they were on different levels there, and he shouldn't have said that. Team leader Lena answered the young man that he does not understand anything at all and does not know how to behave among these creatures. She tried to say that it wasn't that they were aliens. You could call anyone an enemy and he would become one. At that moment, they stopped because they came. The girl said that it was here that they could rise one level higher. Mark looked up. It was unexpected for him. After all, in reality, it was just the arena of the tournament. She wanted to say that it was in the arena that they could raise their level. When they approached the arena zone 3, they were told welcome to those who came from different corners of the universe. It was the greatest space festival that was held once every 100 years, a place of opportunity where the level of every civilization could be instantly raised. All these aliens came here to raise the level of their country, and they were told welcome to the GSP tournament. Mark said that in his opinion, it turns out that she came to watch the tournament, covering it up by saying that she just came to watch. The girl answered him that she came here to find out the weaknesses of the enemies. The young man did not understand at all what she was talking about now. They looked at the participant of the competition, 972nd place, in the civilization ranking representative of the civilization of the Agni Ifrits. On the other hand, against him will be a participant from the 9,630th place, a representative of the Piglo civilization. His name was Panon. Everyone looked at the arena and did not understand who would be the winner. The announcer's voice said that it was time to start the qualifying competition. At this time in Zone Number 3, District Z, in the promotion hall, the lights were on and work was in full swing. One of the workers said that it was time for them to wrap up. The other agreed with him, and they headed for the exit. One of the workers stopped while passing by the statue and thought he heard something. He felt very strange, so he tried to listen if there was anyone else in this empty room. His partner asked him what he was doing there and told him to hurry to the exit. This worker asked his partner if he had just heard any sound. He thought it was suspicious. His partner said that he didn't hear any sounds, he only hears his nonsense. Then he thought that he really heard it and nothing happened, but that was not so. This monster had one eye open and he could look from one side to the other with one eye. Complete darkness was over for him. All this took place on a planet located 500,000 light years from Earth. Every 100 years, combat tournaments were held with the participation of various civilizations from all over the universe. It was believed that in the tournament, the civilization that emerges victorious would comprehend the truth of all things. And most importantly, she is freed from the disease of hunger, warriors, and other adversities. This time, the Earth officially received the right to participate in this tournament. The participant who represented them is known to be the strongest man on Earth, and they believed that it would be easy for them to reach the final as well as to win the championship. This man really lived up to his nickname, the Living Flame. Mark and Lena watched what was happening on this arena. The announcer shouted that the whole of arena was instantly engulfed in intense fire. The young people thought it was just some bastard, but he was quite strong. This guy told his opponent that he would burn him alive. Then he swung to deliver a fiery blow to his opponent. His opponent did not move from the spot. The spectators who were watching were all rooting for Agni. They thought that he should show everyone what he was capable of. The announcer said that the excitement of the audience is as strong as that of the participant Agni. His popularity is simply enormous and he enjoys support. Everyone looked at the representative of the civilization Piglo, who was in 9,630th place on Panon, who stood in place and heard how they were shouting the name of his opponent. His opponent shouted at him that he dare not turn away when a representative of the Ifrit civilization approaches. His place was 972nd Agni. It was his name that the spectator shouted. Panon had no intention of giving up and he had no intention of turning away. In fact, he was ready to take the blow. Agni actually delivered a fiery blow so that all of arena was on fire. The announcer said that even he had never seen such a breath of Agni, capable of burning everything in its path, is now blazing with all its might. The young people stood and watched what was happening. They understood that Agni was a head taller than his opponent, and he was quite stronger than him. Agni himself was so confident in his powers that he laughed at his rival and showed everyone the power of Lord Agni. The young people were very surprised. Mark asked how they would fight such monsters at all. He wanted to know if they would continue to look for his weaknesses. In fact, he didn't think that it would help. His partner said that if you think like that, then in fact you can say that it won't really help them much. Then the young man answered her that he was saying that they were just wasting their time. The girl said that he was wrong. Then she added that she didn't have a better expectation either, but she realized something important. She added that none of the third-level aliens were focused on this match. They are not paying attention to this match and are doing their own thing but not watching the opponent. Since this tournament could completely change the fate of an entire civilization, she expected a completely different reaction from the third-level participants. But she feels that a first-level civilization is insignificant in their eyes, so she decided that she should use their arrogance to give a worthy rebuff. Then the girl told her partner that if he understood everything, he should continue to track down weak points. Mark was not very happy with this proposal. One of the spectators shouted that Panon cannot lose in this. It is very important for them. This alien approached the young people and also began to observe everything that was happening in the arena. He tried to support Panon. The young man looked in his direction and wondered if this kid was also one of the Piglo representatives. Mark thought that in fact they weren't having much luck with civilization either. Things weren't going very well for them. And here in the arena, their opponent was a top fighter from a third-level civilization. When the heat of the flame was several webs, Then Pannon was nowhere to be seen. One of the spectators started shouting for them to continue attacking. Probably this bastard just turned to ashes. The young man thought that it was very dangerous here, Mother. He decided that he needed to tell the team leader and move away from this place. A quarrel arose between the two spectators and the aliens. One of them told the other not to talk like that about Pannon, because he doesn't know anything about him. The second one took a sip from his mug, wiped his mouth, and said that this little underdeveloped idiot had no manners at all and was pestering strangers. The alien was very offended that he was called a small, underdeveloped idiot. He said the same thing in response, that he was also a small fool. Mark told the team leader that they needed to get out of there as quickly as possible, because if they stayed there, they might get into an argument. The two stood opposite each other, taking turns trying to insult their opponent. One of these guys was telling the other that he was a loser and that he didn't understand at all who he was dealing with. The second one tried to answer him that he is considered absolutely normal on their planet, and he is not small at all. After which this little one received a blow and flew to the side. His opponent said that he could be considered as anything on his planet. Mark immediately told his partner that it was simply dangerous to stay there. The girl did not understand what he was talking about. This guy grew even larger in size and became simply huge in relation to his small opponent. He asked his opponent if he could turn him into a bloody mess in 10 seconds. This was a representative of the Pixie civilization rank 1300. This was the engineer, Mr. Pixie. The girl looked at this whole situation and thought that it was not cool at all to show off strength in front of a child. Pixie got even more angry, so he immediately repeated what he said. The girl answered him that he is considered ordinary on his planet. If she understood correctly, he needs to stop showing off. From his words, it was clear that he is an ordinary loser. And then she added that rather than these lower civilizations taking some drugs together, and they really pissed her off. Pixie didn't understand if she was joking. Mark asked her again if he was also one of the idiots in her opinion. The girl answered what would happen if he got angry. He was just a loser. Pixie asked her again if she really wanted to see what would happen if he got angry. He stood huge next to his very small rival. Mark asked her to move away from him because this big guy would not understand everything if she stood next to him. The girl asked if he was really ready to abandon his leader. At that moment, Pixie told them that he was preparing to show them what would happen if he got angry. They both turned their heads and looked at him, but they also saw that right above his head appeared a patrol that was guarding the arena. The patrol ordered Pixie to stop. Otherwise, if he did not comply, they would act according to the rules. Pixie thought that this patrol appeared here at the wrong time. He didn't want to be removed from the competition. Lena confirmed to her partner that it was indeed the security patrolling the arena. It was unclear what he was doing at the stadium when there were so many security guards around. It was simply unreal. The security asked the young people if this creature had harmed them. The girl laughed. She didn't understand what harm was being discussed. She replied that he didn't directly harm anyone, but this idiot started showing off with his muscles. Is he really drunk? And then she added that she had lost her appetite, but now she is fine. The security asked again if he was really showing off his muscles, and it was true. The girl said that he bragged about his physique. He said that he was a level 1 monster and asked him to show the same thing to the patrolman. This monster got very angry because she said that, and he started screaming. How dare she slander him? Mark thought that this guy was very Zoe, and if he screamed like that, his eyes would definitely pop out. Lena said that before this monster really harmed anyone, he needed to be deprived of the opportunity to be released without any consequences. His opponent was very scared. He didn't understand if he was punishing him like this. Mark said that he should just stop provoking him. Maybe that would be the end of it. Security asked Pixie if he really wanted to show off his useless muscles. Pixie told them that yes, he definitely wanted to brag, but he didn't intend to hurt anyone. He said that in that case, it turns out that he didn't do anything bad to anyone because that's how his body became the same as it was before. Then Pixie turned around and started running away very quickly. He told Mark and Lena that they would see each other again. He wouldn't leave it like this. Mark wiped the sweat off his face, looked after him, and said that he wasn't going to see him anymore. There was no reason for that. Then he turned and looked at Lena. He asked her if she knew that the outcome would be like this. The girl answered that, of course. And then she added, does he really think she's crazy enough to just mess with a monster? She said it looks like she's got a phobia of monsters again. At that moment, she felt someone pulling her things from behind. She heard someone's voice asking for forgiveness. She turned her head and saw the same little boy who was holding her things. He told her a big thank you for her help. The girl looked at him and said it was still unclear who helped whom more. And then she added that he should get out as quickly as possible because he was distracting from the match. Mark thought that in fact everything was as usual. His partner suddenly lost her temper and started being rude. So he put his hand on the head of this little alien and said that everything should be clear to him from what the scary aunt said. He should go as quickly as possible. At that moment, this creature threw away Mark's hand and said that he should get out because he was a coward. Mark stood for a while and looked at this creature. He did not understand why he had just been called that. After all, he was also really scared then. It was unclear why he had just been insulted. Lena told him to shut up because he really was a coward. The audience was very excited. They shouted for him to stop bumping into them and come out. They were outraged. Did he really call himself a representative of their civilization? The announcer said that the participant Panyon was criticized because no one expected that he would not resist at all in the arena. The girl thought that it was quite expected, but the break with the third-level civilization was depressing. Everything was on fire in the arena, and Panon's opponent was pleased with what he was doing, because he hadn't played hide-and-seek for a long time, as it seemed to him. Lena was thinking about only one thing. Is it really true that Earthlings don't have the ability to defeat such a monster? She needed to raise the level of her civilization in order to defeat the warriors who were on Earth, and also to defeat diseases that were progressing on Earth, and no one knew how to fight them. The girl thought that she shouldn't even allow such pathetic thoughts that she won't be able to win. Mark looked in her direction. He didn't understand why she suddenly turned away from him again. What happened again? He approached her and asked how she was feeling, because it was obvious that she was shaking all over. The girl replied that he shouldn't worry. Nothing like that had happened to her. At that moment, the announcer shouted very loudly for everyone to wait 1 minute. He said that the participant Panon had not yet given up. The girl carefully watched everything that was happening in the arena without taking her eyes off. The announcer said that Panon was aiming at Agni's blind spot, cutting through the flames that were around him. The whole arena was one continuous flame, and there was no place where you could walk without being touched by the flames. Agni didn't stop and made another blow towards his opponent. Everything was on fire. His opponent understood that it was a desperate blow on the brink of death. It was a perfect hit. The announcer said that for Agni this was a decisive blow. He showed everything he was capable of. Mark was talking on the phone at that time. The announcer said that Agni's opponent could not rise at all. It was the end for him. Mark called Lena. He wanted to tell her what they told him on the phone. The girl answered him. Why is he calling her? She had already told him that she was fine. Mark told her that it wasn't about that at all, that there was something wrong with the exhibition, but that they wanted the two of them to go and check all the exhibits right now. Lena was very upset because she was distracted from the battle in the arena. She told Mark that she had told him to check the exhibits twice. The young man answered her that it was very strange because he checked everything. The girl said that she was sure that something would go wrong because he looked too happy at the beginning. The young man answered her that it was very strange. There shouldn't be any problems, especially with the exhibits. Lena thought for a bit and said that she had already seen everything she needed, so she wouldn't be angry with him anymore. She said that even her eyes found it hard to believe who would have thought that he would truly defeat such a monster. Then she added that as expected, they are not the kind of opponents they are unable to fight back. A smile appeared on her face. The girl felt the wind and asked what kind of wind it was and why it appeared so suddenly. In just a few minutes, they were on the same planet GSP near zone number 3 on Street Z where the promotion center was located. The next moment she felt that she didn't feel anything at all. Her eyes were closed. When she opened one eye, she did not understand what happened to her at the last moment. But she saw that 2 huge thugs were near them. One of these thugs was holding Mark by the leg and pulling him somewhere. The young man, like her, was unconscious. He couldn't say anything. He didn't even make a single sound. The girl felt that someone was holding her by the hair. She thought about her partner, Mark. She wanted him to come to his senses as quickly as possible. She didn't know what to do. When one of these thugs saw that her eyes were open, he laughed. He was glad that she woke up. The second asked if she really called the guy he was holding by the leg Mark. These thugs told the girl not to worry. They didn't actually kill him. She thought they were just idiots. Lena looked at this big guy and said that he was just a bastard and most likely got angry at her for teasing him. Then she added that he had not learned anything at all, because this was the planet GSP, and if he had not understood, then security would arrive soon. This thug tried to tell her that she should shut up because she didn't dare talk to him at all since she was a lower being. And then he added that most of the security devices on the planet work on the basis of technology and their civilization, and in this building, he has already completely decided. Then he hit her again with his finger on the ubu and told her to understand once and for all that she could not do anything. This alien said that the Galactic Federation has changed a lot now, and everything is not like it was before. In fact, they do not accept stupid fools. And then he added that they would not accept them. The girl could not restrain herself and screamed very loudly for them to shut up. Then she added that they themselves did not really want to join the stupid Federation. But the Federation just stormed into the land without any warning and forced them to do it. She had absolutely no regard for any laws and did not take into account the people living on this planet. This Federation simply forced the people who ruled this planet to join this Federation. In fact, all this happened because of the infection that the Federation spread. After the spread of this infection, millions of people die in agony. No one knows how to treat this infection. The stupid fucking Federation said it turned planet Earth into one continuous zone where infected people exist. And she added that they say that interference in civilization is prohibited, but no one has ever shown any support. People just died and continue to die. These two thugs stood and listened to everything she said. They had nothing to say in response. Then one of them couldn't hold back and threw up right on her. He couldn't listen to anything she was saying. Then he added that she admits that her civilization is at an end. The second one laughed loudly and said, did she really think that the Federation was some kind of charity organization or something like that? Then he added that the infection she was talking about is something that primitive civilizations still suffer from. The second thug added that he thought such primitive creatures no longer existed. They could only be seen in museums. The two heard some noise. They heard a voice that said that everything they said was very interesting, but he didn't understand what kind of sect dared to wake him up. Then he saw these two. When he saw these two big guys, he thought they were from the Shaolin Temple, and they had some reputation in the martial arts world. This monster sat and looked at these two thugs and said that, doesn't it seem to them that everything has changed dramatically now? That everything around here is so pretentious that it looks more like a room in a huge hotel. The girl tried to raise her head. She understood that the speech was very familiar, and it was someone from Earthlings. These two thugs didn't understand a word, and they asked him again what he was saying and asked him to change the language. They considered him a piece of trash. The monster who had just woken up was perplexed that they didn't understand human language. He looked at them and added that they had changed not only the interior, then he thought that if they didn't speak human language, it was even better than he thought. The girl couldn't hold back and screamed, asking him to report to security as quickly as possible. She tried to explain that these two thugs were breaking the rules of the Federation. One of these thugs asked the sitting monster what he was planning there. Did he really want to die? The war demon laughed very loudly. Now everything became clear to him. He was in the right place at the right time. Then he extended his hand and checked if his strength had returned to him. Now he knew for sure that not everything had changed yet. These two thugs were very surprised because they did not expect that they would be resisted. The war demon didn't think long. He used one of his techniques. It was a whirlwind strike. At that moment, he snuffed out all those thugs. Lena only managed to cover her face so as not to damage it, but this thug continued to hold her by the hair with his huge hand. Then she felt this hand fall right next to her. She was afraid to even turn her head and see what happened to this big guy. In fact, there was practically nothing left of him. The war demon told the girl to stop being nervous because she understood him perfectly and everything he said. She was a little scared. She was in pain. Blood was flowing. She turned her head and looked at him. The monsters approached her and told her that he had a lot of questions, so if she tried to escape, the same thing would happen to her. He warned her that he wouldn't even warn her. He would just kill her on the spot. And then he extended his bloody hand straight towards her. Lena continued to sit opposite the standing guy. She told him that she had a lot of questions for him. The guy who came out of the darkness wasn't as aggressive as he had been before, but that was only because he didn't understand what was happening. Lena was very surprised. She didn't understand how he just did it, so that this big guy fell to the ground. She didn't even have time to notice anything. This guy put his hand to her head and hit her forehead with his finger several times and said that she was just a girl who didn't understand anything. Then he told her to speak clearly if she valued her life. The girl realized that he did not accept ordinary speech. This guy first wanted to ask her to explain where they are now. The girl answered, "What kind of building is this? The promotion on Z Street." Her savior was very surprised. He didn't understand if this wasn't the Shaolin Temple, because all his last memories were from there. He looked around and realized that the energy emitted from different parts was clearly from Shaolin. Then he said that it was very noisy here, so it couldn't be a temple of monks. The girl had only one question, who he was. The guy looked at her in bewilderment. It seemed to him that this question was simply inappropriate. She made the assumption that judging by the language he spoke and his appearance, he was clearly from the earth. After looking at him carefully, she added that it seemed he didn't have any special devices. But she was only confused by one thing. What kind of explosion was it that he was able to destroy two thugs with? At that moment, The guy got really angry and shouted at her that she was probably crazy if she was talking about such things. The girl wanted to know from the stranger who he was and demanded that he state his affiliation. The guy was very surprised. He didn't understand what kind of belonging she was talking about and what she wanted from him at all. He looked at her and asked if she didn't know who he was. He was completely sure that no one had forgotten about him yet. The girl answered him that of course she doesn't know who he is and doesn't understand why she should know. She asked him if he was some kind of celebrity that absolutely everyone should know about. She turned her head and shouted that there was another big guy behind them and an alien was trying to attack them. This thug was very outraged how this guy dared to fight them back because he was a lower being. The guy looked at him and thought that this big guy was really persistent and couldn't calm down. So he turned around and decided he had to calm him down. The big guy swung his huge fist to hit him. The guy didn't understand what the hell was going on and why this big guy was trying to attack him. He raised his hand and swung it to fight back this big guy. When the thug came closer, the guy hit him right in the chest. The thug couldn't resist. Then the guy thought that this big guy is just a useless creature that has huge dimensions. After the first blow, the guy struck again. The thug, despite his enormous size, could not resist and began to fall. The guy after the second blow did not understand anything at all, he thought. Is it really possible that the one who is here is not training his internal energy? And then he raised his hand and directed the internal energy of his power straight at this big guy. The girl was very surprised. She thought that this guy blocked the blow of the thug with one of his hands. Then the guy turned around and asked the girl if she really didn't know who he was. Lena didn't understand what was going on. Was he really that famous on Earth with such power? It would be strange if no one knew about him. The girl asked for forgiveness. She said that she had spent a lot of time on other planets, so she knew little about the Earth. Her words surprised this guy even more. She was talking about some other planets, about the Earth. He didn't understand at all what they were talking about. Lena tried to explain to him that she was saying that because of her work, she did not spend time on Earth. At that moment, the voice of her assistant Mark was heard calling for team leader Lena. The young man approached the team leader and this guy and asked them what happened. He doesn't remember anything at all. The girl looked at Mark. She was glad that he had woken up. The guy who was standing with her told the young man that he didn't understand where these weaklings were coming from. Mark looked at this guy and asked what weaklings he was talking about and who he was anyway. Lena asked her assistant that he also didn't know who this guy was. Mark asked again if he was really known. The girl answered that maybe Mark wanted to know what was going on here. The young man thanked the guy for saving him, but he still had some questions for him. He said that it would be difficult for them to continue to cooperate if this guy did not reveal his identity. The guy laughed and said, how dare he threaten him? Then he raised his head, laughed even louder, and said if they wanted it that way, he was ready to tell them about himself. He began to tell them that he was a great demon and his name was Jin Wol, and it was he who destroyed the 4 great sects. When Mark listened to his story, he thought that what he was talking about was pure childishness. He told the team leader that he thought this guy was completely out of his mind. The girl was not so clear-cut. She turned to the great demon. She was interested in how he introduced himself as Jin Wol. What did that mean? His name sounded very unusual. The guy didn't have time to answer this question as they heard a loud bang. When they turned around, they saw that one of these thugs hit the ground with his fist. This big guy couldn't come to his senses because he didn't understand how he could lose to the scum. When Mark saw Pixie, he asked what he was doing here. And was it really because of what happened earlier? Pixie was very angry. Blood was flowing from his mouth. He was just not himself. He thought that it was all because of this bastard. Everyone looked at Pixie and Mark said he thought the guy was going to explode. Then he turned to the great demon Jin Wol. He wanted to test his powers once again. That's why he suggested to Jin Wol that if he could defeat Pixie again in this state. The great demon, when he heard such a proposal, asked again what it meant in such a state. Was it really not his full strength that he showed? The girl noticed that this was exactly how this big guy did not even show half of it. Jin Wol immediately turned around and headed towards this big guy. He found it offensive that this big guy felt sorry for him. The girl told her assistant that she needed to get as much information out of this guy as possible. Mark was so upset and worried about his condition that he did not understand what all this was about. He told her that in fact she herself knew better than anyone what the consequences would be. The girl said that she really knows everything, but there is a feeling that this is their chance to win this competition. Mark didn't understand and asked the girl not to stay there. He didn't know what opportunity she was talking about. He suggested that she run away. Lena answered him that she would stay and watch this battle. Mark did not stay and very quickly left this place. He thought that everyone here had gone crazy. Lena thought maybe it was just crazy that she stayed to watch this battle, but it seemed to her that this could be a way out. But she also understood that this guy who was ready to fight and who called himself a great demon, he really showed what he was capable of. He didn't hesitate for a second or stop in front of any monster. This guy, even though he called himself a great monster, he looked overwhelming. At this moment, Pixie turned his head. He was ready to fight again. This was the potential of a person of the first level of civilization. From the outside, it was clear that with the level of strength that Pixie had, there was no need to even start to engage in battle. The result seemed predictable. The girl stayed here only to understand whether she has a chance or not. Pixie got so angry that he started screaming that he didn't care about the rules that exist, and he was afraid of the guards. He was ready to kill them all. So he took a few steps towards the guy. Lena, when she watched him, she thought that this is exactly what she was waiting for. It was Pixie who got out of control. Pixies are cosmic creatures that can even control metal. It seemed that they had no equal. Jinwoo didn't lose his head. He saw the enemy in front of him and understood that he could deal with him. Pixie began to attack and used all his strength to crush his opponent. His attacks were hitting their target. Pixie looked at the guy and told him to understand the difference between civilizations, then once again extended his hand towards him to attack him. With the help of his power, Pixie began to control everything metal. He collected it into one huge computer and directed it towards his enemy. Indeed, the guy ended up under the debris of metal objects, and it turned out that he could not get out of there. Jinwoo smiled and said that it was too tempting, but he couldn't handle it. What happened next, no one could even expect. All the metal objects began to fly apart in different directions. Pixie could barely keep himself on his feet. He thought that this couldn't be happening. No one could have the same power as them. Jinwoo began to rise from his knees, and Pixie was even more surprised that nothing happened to his opponent. The great demon told his opponent that he was just an idiot and that he didn't understand who he was dealing with. Then he added that he wants the same power as Pixie, and he wants to get it immediately. Pixie was confused. He didn't understand what was happening. He wondered if this guy could really break his power. He almost cried because he thought that this couldn't be, that this scumbag of his opponent was stronger than him. Pixie didn't understand how it happened. He tried to calm down and not think negatively about the fact that something like this could happen. It seemed to him that it was simply impossible that such scum could resist him, so he swung to strike his opponent again. The blow was really powerful, and it destroyed almost everything around. It seemed that nothing should remain alive after such a blow. Pixie even laughed because at some point it seemed to him that he had achieved his goal. He started talking about how this loser of his opponent can't underestimate him and speak disrespectfully towards him, but he couldn't even imagine that his enemy was sitting on his neck. Pixie, when he raised his eyes, he saw his enemy. He did not understand how he could be there. Jinwoo jumped up. Pixie tried to catch him, but he couldn't. And that's why Pixie got even more angry that he couldn't do anything about his opponent. Pixie started screaming. He didn't understand what kind of tricks his opponent was doing. He was confused. Jinwoo landed on the ground. Around him were metal objects that he could control. The guy raised his hand and said that it is done like this and he can control metal objects just like Pixie. Pixie was just furious. He couldn't believe it. Did he imagine it or was it real? After which he struck and there was a loud explosion. It seemed that everything should be over. The girl looked at everything that was happening and could not believe her eyes. Pixie got even more angry. He shouted that his opponent was just a scumbag. He couldn't believe what was happening. And most importantly, he couldn't believe how this guy could use the power in their civilizations. Jinwoo looked at his hand and how he could use the power he just acquired. He thought, is this really what is called the power of space? He was happy that he had acquired such power and he liked it. But he told his opponent that he was ready to show his technique as a thank you for giving him the opportunity to acquire such power. Pixie was just furious. He was smashing everything around him. He was screaming that this guy shouldn't imitate them. He was just a piece of shit to them. Jinwoo answered him that he was not imitating at all and had no intention of imitating at all. He had no less strength than them. And the next moment, he showed what he was capable of and showed what strength he had. Stones and metal objects were directed towards Pixie. Pixie no longer knew what to threaten him with. He began to scream that this guy would pay with his life for what he did to him. Jinwoo approached his opponent. He showed his ability and used the ferocious tiger paw. This was his attack in response to the opponent. The great demon laughed after a successful attack and said that he was able to rob his opponent. The girl watched it to the end and was in shock. She couldn't even imagine that this guy could win, but he did. Despite the fact that third-level cosmic power was used against him, Pixie lay on the ground and did not move. Lena thought that it was incredible, but this was her chance. She thought that with this guy, they wouldn't be able to win. She looked at his feet. They were even without shoes. She was wondering what kind of guy he was. When he came closer to her, he said that it was quite an interesting martial art and he liked that he had such strength. Then he told this girl to immediately take him to where all these guys who had such abilities were located. She was interested in only one question. Why did he come? She took his hand and tried to touch it, but it was a completely ordinary hand. She knew for sure that it was not easy to get to this planet. Did he really want to prove his strength and specially get to this planet? The girl said that everything was now clear to her, and she was ready to take him to a place where the guys were much stronger than these guys. And then she added that he would become a representative of human civilization at the tournament. When Mark returned, he looked at the fact that everything around was destroyed. Everything was scattered everywhere, nothing was whole. He wondered if this was all true, and Lena really told him how it all happened. He looked around again and thought that he couldn't believe it, but everything pointed to the fact that this guy really had defeated Pixie. Pixie was lying on the ground helpless. It was just necessary to understand who was the crazy person who could do all this. Mark heard someone's footsteps and a voice saying that the situation was very different from what he heard. It was the judge of the planet GSP Virtus. He did not understand whether Pixie had really lost his temper and endangered his relatives. Mark thought that things were very bad and he should not have been brought here. When the judge looked around, he said that it seemed to him that a third party had intervened and asked Mark if this was really so. Then he added that even if a representative of a third-level civilization died, it turns out that some higher civilization was involved in the matter. Mark thought about the fact that it was definitely logically difficult to believe that a person did this, but if it really was so, then he had time to contact the team leader. The judge asked the young man what he was so worried about and what he was thinking about. Mark answered that he was thinking about absolutely nothing. The judge told him again that he was lying. He was clearly upset and it was not worth hiding from him. The young man turned his head, laughed, and said that Judge Virtus was unbearable to fool, and then added that he was just worried about his friend. The judge told his friend that, judging by what happened, the suspect is a real criminal. But then he pointed his stone finger forward and told the young man not to worry. The best ones were to follow, or the planets were already restoring events. And then he added that very soon they would find out who did it. Mark saw that the very machines that had materialized in the past were working in front of him. Mark raised his head up and saw that all the metal objects also rose up and were not in the air. He even became a little scared when he saw a huge metal object above his head. He thought that this meant that if he remained standing in this place, this object could fall right on him. The judge told him not to lose heart. Soon they will all find out and it will be clear who this criminal is. After which the judge did not wait long. He pushed off from the earth and began to fly upwards. A few seconds later, he was no longer in that place. Only one pillar remained, meaning that the judge had left that place. When he flew away, he said that as a judge, he would definitely avenge his relatives. Mark was a little scared. He didn't know what to do, but he continued to stand in that same place and watch as the judge disappears from his field of vision after just a few minutes, and there is not even a trace of the judge. Mark continued to stand in one place for some time, raising his head up and not moving. He thought that things were very bad. He wanted to contact the leader. 30 minutes ago, before the judge got to this scene of the incident, there were only two people there, Lena and Jin Wall. He told her that when he came to his senses and realized that he was here, the girl listened to him attentively and thought about what he was talking about what world of martial arts, and also about the fact that he was sealed. It was a very strange story. The only thing she understood was that it explained everything, as he spoke in a language that she had not heard before, and she realized that he could absorb power just as he absorbed the power of this monster. She thought she had never heard of a cosmic force that absorbed someone else's power, but if she was wrong, then everything would only become more confusing. She found it very strange how humanity could have decided to have such abilities if he was actually telling the truth. If this is really true, then it's as if humanity lost the technology and didn't even know they had it. The guy didn't talk to her for long. He turned around and went to the exit. She was a little surprised. She asked him to stop and asked him where he was going to go alone. She found it very surprising. The guy told her that she shouldn't worry because he didn't need her help anyway. He could stand up for himself. The girl asked him to stop and wait because she told him that she would take him to a place where he could fight with much stronger fighters. The guy didn't stop. He kept walking. He told her that he could find this place himself. The girl rushed to catch up with him. She shouted for him to wait a minute because he knows nothing at all about this world. The guy didn't take her words seriously. He thought that it meant he didn't know anything about this world. That was true, but he wasn't worried about it. He opened the door and walked out, and there were many aliens standing in front of him. They were all different. The guy was a little shocked. He didn't understand who they were and why they looked like that. The girl managed to catch up with him. She took him by the shoulder and said that she had warned him that he knew absolutely nothing about this world. And then she added that, "Welcome to the 26th century." The guy looked at her. When he raised his head, he saw many cosmic objects moving around. She tried to explain to him that this era is called the 2600th era of space exploration of the Earth. The guy did not understand what the era of space exploration meant. The girl explained that he should have already noticed that they had begun to interact with other civilizations. He asked what was so special about communicating with these countries of beings. She even found it funny that he called aliens strange beings. Anapa tried to explain to him that if he had to distribute creatures by levels of civilization, then it would be interesting to see where he would allocate a place for people. The guy answered her that he had no idea. He was only interested in one question: how many creatures like he sees in front of him? So as not to distract others, he put on a t-shirt and slippers. The girl explained to him that in this universe there are about 20,000 civilizations and humanity is at the very bottom of the food chain. The guy looked at the girl and asked, what it turns out that the bald guy he fought with is also considered above the level. Then it is not clear how stupid humanity is. The girl said that to some extent he is right, but he should watch his words. She talked about how there is a 5-level scale in the universe that is classified by the relationships between civilizations. She talked about how people are at the very bottom, and it is believed that they only have the first level. Of course, even among a first-level civilization, they are still at the very bottom. The guy looked at her and asked if she really cared about this stupid department she just tried to tell him about. The girl lowered her head. She didn't quite think that this stupid department seemed so to her. The guy replied that if he were in her place, he would take better care to become stronger than she actually is. At that moment, she turned to him again. The guy raised his eyes and looked at her. Lena said that she is ready to offer him again the same thing that she already offered him once. The guy didn't understand what it meant to propose and why he should suddenly agree to any of her proposals. The girl said that he wants to fight with all the strongest creatures. She understood this from his words. Jinwal answered her that you can say it like this. She tried to explain to him that on this planet, a unique tournament is held once every 100 years, and that in this tournament, the most diverse, powerful creatures participate. She offers him to act as a representative of the Earth. It is in this case that he can meet with the strongest opponents. The guy is a little surprised because the girl offered him to fight for her, or instead of her. She told him, but he wanted to meet the strongest opponents, and this is his opportunity to meet them. The guy got angry and ordered her to shut up. He understood that she wanted to use him just by exchanging a few words. She said that she is not as stupid as he thinks if they accuse her of it. Then she asked him for forgiveness if he thought so, and she was ready to change her request. She explained to him that if they do well in the tournament, then humanity can rise to a new level and rise from the very bottom. The guy thought if this is true, then it became clear to him why all this stupid division at the level. The girl couldn't hold back and shouted at Nuala that this wasn't a stupid separation at all, as he thought. He asked her again, what does she call this department? Several levels, in fact. They were garbage, and will remain so. The girl couldn't help but look at the guy and ask him, what if not? What if they won't be this trash? She explained to him that in order to move to the next level, he simply needs to do well at the tournament. In fact, the levels of civilization are determined on the basis of the cosmic force of life energy that determines existence itself. All powers that go beyond common sense, as it was in the battle with Pixie. They appear only when a person is able to freely control the elusive flow. The guy listened to her words and said that now everything became clear to him, and he thought about her proposal. If he wants to use this mysterious power, it seems that it will only be available to him with the transition to a new level. The girl said that they have no chance to win this tournament. She said that she wants him to fight the monsters and win. Simply put, she needed a victory. But when civilization moves to another level, he will not only get a chance to use superpowers, but he will also receive enlightenment, such knowledge that he will not receive so easily even in his entire life. The guy asked again what kind of knowledge he should receive was transferred to the next level, which he would not be able to receive in his entire life. The girl tried to explain to him that this is the knowledge that humanity has now. It was the result of several centuries of effort and the progress of new technologies. She also added that gradually, as space exploration progressed, they learned the truth. The truth was that everything they had gained was through experience and great effort, just a small part of what is stored in the huge brain at the edge of the universe. She also added that there are those who control this knowledge and allow it to spread so easily. They are called finite beings, and they are the only civilization of the fifth level. It is they who conduct this damn tournament. Knowledge is transferred to each civilization in accordance with the restrictions. The guy listened to her until the end. He said that it was just some kind of boredom. He wasn't interested in all this. He understood only one thing, that as he said, she wants to use him instead of herself. The girl said that yes, that is exactly it, but he should listen to her to the end, because that is what she is offering him, for the sake of all humanity. The guy turned around and started to leave. He told her not to get carried away and to find someone who would share her views. And then he added that, however, he doesn't think that there will be any fool willing to risk his life for the sake of others. At that moment, a huge hand appeared that was ready to grab the guy. He almost managed to get away, but something stopped him. He didn't even understand what it was. At that moment, a judge appeared who was conducting an investigation into what had happened. When the judge landed, he said that the investigation was complete and he knew exactly who the criminal was. The judge said that no one could have imagined that this would be the work of a civilization of such a low rank. At that moment, he had to destroy it. The judge was completely confident that he had translated into execution and destroyed the criminal. Lena was surprised by what happened at that moment. Although she couldn't persuade him, she had a chance to do it. The judge approached the girl and said that she would be convicted of interfering with Pixie's affairs. The judge extended his hand to the girl. He was ready to carry out his punishment. The girl began to writhe and say that it hurt, but she couldn't say anything. At that moment, she heard the voice of that same guy and saw that his body was being restored. She continued to sit and watch what was happening. This had never happened in her life, and she had never known about this before. She was surprised when she realized that this guy was actually alive, and he was trying to say something in her defense. Jikwal, or the great demon, almost restored his body. He shouted at the judge to stop and not touch the girl. The judge, when he heard these words, turned his head and looked at him. He didn't know how to react to this. Despite the fact that the guy's body had not yet been fully restored, he still told the judge not to even move here. Otherwise, the consequences would be dire. On this planet in the 3rd sector on Street C, there were quite a lot of representatives of different planets. Some were in a hurry somewhere, others were just walking. This street was more like a sector where you could have a lot of entertainment. The representative of Piglo Mal walked along the street and told about how the Earthling sister helped him. He said that he was very grateful to her. He told all this to the representative of Piglo Grog and the representative of Piglo Fist. They came to the conclusion that in the dispute with the representatives of Pixie, it seems that people were braver than the rumors said about them. The three of them were walking down this street when they noticed another representative of their planet. He stopped them and asked what they were chatting about so happily without him. Kulak tried to explain that their youngest got herself into trouble when she went to cheer at the match. Unexpectedly for everyone, their youngest threw the balloon that was in her hand and screamed joyfully because she saw Panyon. And she rushed to hug him because he was able to win this battle and she always believed in him. Kulak asked his fellow countrymen if he really had to go through a lot in this battle. The representative of the civilization Piglo, he had 4,800 place, and his name was Panon. He answered that they should not worry, now he is already in excellent shape after this battle and is ready to fight further. Then he looked at the younger one and asked if she had really brought trouble on herself during his battle. The aliens who were on this street started to run away, while they were shouting that Judge Virtus had arrived. Who was shouting that the judge was on the street? Everyone needed to run. No one understood what was happening. Then someone explained that the judge was being pursued by the Earthlings who killed the representative of Pixie for the representatives of the Piglo civilization. It was a familiar combination and had not already encountered the two of them. The younger one tugged at the hand of the conqueror of her civilization and asked him to look at her. He asked what was wrong and what happened. Why was she behaving like that? She didn't know where to start. She said that she just wanted to say something. Pagnon understood that the younger one was not just trying to convey something to him. That is why he looked at her. Someone's scream could be heard. It was clear that everyone needed to run from the building because it was starting to collapse. The debris of this building began to fall to the ground. No one understood what was happening, but everyone tried to escape from this place. Lena sat on the ground among all this debris. She understood only one thing, that she had survived. She couldn't even imagine a few minutes ago that this could happen because of her. Jinwal stood at the top. He declared that everyone should know what happens when they touch someone they shouldn't touch. He celebrated his victory in advance. She made another check forward and he saw the light that was breaking through these fragments. He thought that it was amazing and that this couldn't be, but the light began to break through not in one place, but already in several places. The guy couldn't even imagine that his opponent had gotten out and he couldn't punish him. jumping over a huge pile of scrap metal on the other side. He saw that light was breaking through from the other side too. He thought he couldn't believe it, but then he saw the hand with his own eyes, and then he realized the judge was calling. Jinwoo got even more angry because he didn't understand how this could be, and the enemy in front was really strong. The judge threw away several metal objects and began to rise to his feet. He asked the guy if he had really absorbed Pixie's cosmic power so that he could throw metal objects at him. Then the judge, when he got to his feet, said that he thought this guy was much more dangerous than he expected. Jinwoo told him that he understood that the judge was starting to regret getting involved with him, which made him happy, after which the guy did not stop. He continued to attack the judge. He swung his leg to strike. He wanted to strike with a tearing explosion. Jinwoo did not stop moving towards his opponent in order to attack him. He was furious and knew it was too late for him to back down now. A few seconds later, the attack caused a very strong explosion that affected nearby buildings. The explosion was so powerful that everyone started shouting that they needed to be careful and that they should evacuate the planet as quickly as possible. The girl continued to sit on the ground. She was in shock. She did not understand why he was doing this and how it could end. She thought to herself, what the hell was he doing? The judge was standing right in front of her. Unexpectedly for her, someone covered her mouth so that she could not scream. It was Panon who told the girl to calm down because he had come to save her. One of the civilization Panon followed him. Panon turned his head when he saw him and asked what he would do here because he told them to take the little one away and stay away from this place. Lena didn't understand what was going on, and wasn't this the same Piglo they had seen before? Panon took the girl on his shoulder. He was very upset and swore because no one listened to him. Mala and Fist decided that they shouldn't worry. They had to run away as quickly as possible. Lena looked at everything that was happening, but she couldn't do anything. She had to understand why she was needed by this representative of the Piglo civilization. Panon, unexpectedly for her, began to explain to her that he came and saved her only in order to thank her for the fact that she stood up for him and his brother. Their civilization highly values kindness. Kulak turned around and looked at Panon and said that they needed to run away as quickly as possible. Lena asked them to wait and let her go. At that moment, Panon said that it would be impossible to save their entire company, and he also added that the judges were real monsters who had reached the final of the tournament. She was scared by these words that now everyone could not be saved. She understood that the main battle was now taking place between Jinwoo and the judge. The judge was very surprised when he saw what this guy was capable of. He said that it turns out that the Pixie civilization has more than just power. Then he put one of his hands forward, and this was necessary to protect himself and stop this guy who was trying to attack him from all sides. At this point, the judge used his main force to destroy the opponent and carry out the punishment. It was a very great force that no representative of any civilization could resist. The judge said that it was just a trick and nothing more, because no one could destroy it. Jong-wol told him that he expected the judge to say exactly that, but he was not going to give up. The judge placed his index finger directly on Jinwoo's forehead and directed his power towards him. In turn, Jinwoo was ready to attack, and he was not going to stop the judge and was waiting for him to start first. The judge used his force, pointing it straight at the guy, and said that it looked like he was nothing at all. At that moment, Lena asked the alien who was carrying her on his shoulder to stop and let her go. She was talking about how she needed to save someone, and it would be better if he helped not her, but someone who needed his help more. Panon answered her. Didn't she hear what he just told her? That they couldn't do anything against such a monster? But he was still ready to help her because she saved Mala. Grog replied to Panon that maybe he should stop talking like that, and that all of this has absolutely no meaning. Then he added that he still lives according to the old commandments, and that it is not worth doing. Panon asked him to shut up because this is the ideal by which their civilization exists. And they weren't moving very fast, and some object fell right in front of them, and this object was burning. Panon looked around and saw nothing, but you made him even more confused about what was going on. The only thing he understood was that something burning was falling from the sky. They saw outlines resembling a human form. The girl said that this was the very earthling she asked to save. Panyon, when he saw what was happening and realized that this guy was fighting with Judge Virtus, replied that in that case he was ready to help him. They heard some sound and realized that Judge Virtus was heading to the place where they were now. Grot told his brother Panon that they can't stay here. They need to run away from this place very quickly, and he must leave the girl and this burning guy. He said this because he understood that if they didn't get out of this place now, the same thing would happen to them as to this guy. They would burn. Lena believed in a miracle and hoped that this guy would be able to rise from the ashes. She did not take her eyes off. Then the girl smiled. She thought that she knew everything would be fine with him, and he would come back to life again. so she yelled at the piglos to stop and take a good look at this guy. These two actually decided to stop because the girl asked them to, and they turned to look at the guy who was burning. They were in shock. None of them could even imagine that he could survive. They couldn't believe it. It was unexpected for all of them that this guy was constantly recovering. Even after the flame of Judge Virtus, they thought that maybe the cosmic power of this earthling was regeneration. The judge was also very surprised because he did not understand how for such a lowly creature the power he possessed was too valuable. Panon and his brother in civilization turned around and saw Judge Virtus approaching them. The judge ordered them to release the criminal and leave as quickly as possible. Grot told his brother Panon that this was their last chance and they really had to leave this place. Panon looked at the girl and asked her if she really thought that this guy had any chance and could survive. Lena answered him that he really could survive, and she saw how he was recovering from the pain of terrible wounds. Panon, when he heard these words, was a little surprised, but he said that then they need to immediately take him to the registration office of this planet. If he becomes a real fighter, the judge will not be able to touch him with a finger. Panon turned to his brother in civilization, but he was against it. He asked them to leave as the judge demanded. Panon ordered them to run to the registration office as quickly as possible, and in the meantime, he would be able to detain the judge. Grot could no longer argue with him and considered him a stubborn idiot, but he had no choice but to carry out this order. Grot agreed with his brother. He said that he would do everything as he asked, just so that he would not die in his arms. Panon told his brother that they had nothing to worry about because victory would bring them valuable weapons. When the judge saw them running away, he thought that they were ordinary cabbage rolls, and did they really think that they could escape from the judge? He sent a fireball at them. Lena and Grot tried to escape from this place as quickly as possible and carry the guy away to register him in the fight. Panon answered the judge that he had already heard, and he remembers very well the times when Virtus was not yet a judge. Then his civilization mastered the power of light, and this was their weak point, darkness. Then Panon extended his hand forward and said that today he was ready to deal with him without regret. Because the cosmic force and their civilization at this moment rules the name of the darkness that he fears. Panon also stated that it was obvious to him that helping the virtuous was the basic rule of their civilization and the command of their ancestors. He used the power of darkness to stop the judge. Lena and Grot very quickly got to the tournament registration office. There were quite a lot of aliens there who wanted to register. They got to the employee of the registration office, Kiranos, who did not understand who she had to register, and once again asked them for forgiveness and said that the registration was complete. They demanded that she register Jinwall and stop apologizing to them because this guy was a representative of the land. The registrar told them no. She didn't want to do it for one reason, only because she saw the state he was in and thought it was impossible. They told her that this guy was fine and she should register him as soon as possible. At that moment, everyone started looking around because they didn't understand what the noise was and what was happening. Some kind of confusion arose. Someone present said that it seems that Earthlings are trying to register for the tournament, but they are not accepted. One of the aliens laughed because he didn't understand why the Earth didn't register, because it was the weakest civilization. Everyone thought that no effort should be made against the Earthlings. To win, it would be easy to defeat them. They thought that it was necessary to help the Earthlings register. Lena demanded that they register Jinwall as soon as possible because they don't have time, and she didn't understand what the problem was. Someone present in this room shouted at Kiranos to register this guy as soon as possible because all civilizations have the right to participate in the tournament, and they underestimate the lower civilization. Grot looked at all these aliens who were standing and waiting to register this Earthling. The aliens started shouting, "Register, register, register." The registrar couldn't stand the pressure and said that she would register anyway. Lena looked at her and thought that this was great because initially it was necessary to act as she did now. The registrar asked her for forgiveness and said that they should just let her make sure of one thing. She pointed her finger at the place where the guy had just been lying and asked where the participant they wanted to register was. Lena looked around. She didn't understand where he could have gone because he had just been lying there, writhing in pain. At the same time, on this planet, on Avenue number 3 on G Street, things were not so calm. The judge asked Panon who tried to stop him. He wanted to know why he was doing this. He was interested in the question of what he was getting at all by risking his life in an attempt to save these lands. The judge placed his huge hand on Panon's head and said that he could not understand what was going on in the heads of these low-class people in civilization. Their conversation was interrupted by the voice of the same guy who shouted at the judge to turn his head. When the judge turned his head, he saw Jinwall standing very close. The guy was fully recovered and ready to attack again. The guy shouted that the judge was now really screwed and he wouldn't back down until he destroyed him. Sood said that it is not surprising that he says this because the lowest of civilization makes the stupidest decisions that can be devised. Panyan at that moment shouted to the Earthlings, but that he had frozen all the judge's abilities in time, so he had to hit him as quickly as possible. Jinwal is not a fly to leave the judge's last words. He had to act and not stop. So he told the judge that all that was left for him to do was to judge whether he was a civilization and a creature or not. Then the guy swung and hit him right in the face. After the first blow, he swung back to hit him again. At that moment, the judge's head flew to the side, and this judge was no longer as confident as he had been a few seconds ago. At the same time, in another part of this planet, in Zone Number 3, Avenue Z in the center of the planet's advancement, Mark from the Earth advancement team sat at the ball and thought that it was not his fault at all, that what happened at that moment. He thought that if Lena hadn't intervened initially, none of this would have happened. He blamed her for everything. He thought that he was hiding and no one could find him. He thought that he was safe. But a very loud explosion that happened very close by made him think completely differently. Mark raised his head and looked ahead. He wanted to know what was going on. The first thing that came to his mind was that there had been a terrorist attack very close. Then he thought that it might be some kind of accident. He tried to convince himself that Lena shouldn't have been involved since she was on the same team with him. There was a mask lying on the ground that covered the judge's head. The judge was a little worried because he didn't understand how to proceed further. His head was unprotected. He looked at his opponent and thought that this was no longer a joke. He needed to do something. Jinwal was also very surprised by what the referee was able to call after he landed his punch. After thinking for a while, the young man decided that he had no choice but to accept all the power that the judge possessed for himself. The judge was very indignant. He shouted that he would not be able to forgive this guy for what he did. He screamed that how dare he scratch his mask that was given to him by heaven. Now you could actually see his face, and he was furious and ready to tear the guy to pieces just because he tore off his mask. The judge extended his fiery hand in the hope that he could destroy his opponent again with his power. Jinwal understood that this was exactly what he was aiming for. When the judge started attacking her opponent by launching fireballs at him, the young seagull had no choice but to retreat for a while. When the guy was in a safe place, he decided that he needed to use the flickering movement technique to knock down the judge. The judge managed to grab the guy by the head and try to crush him in such a way that nothing will remain of him this time. Jinwal, despite his opponent trying to stop him, began to attack him from several sides. In response, the judge attacked Jinwal using the same weapons he had, fireballs. These collisions resulted in explosions that destroyed everything in their path. These fireballs, when they hit the ground, exploded and destroyed everything nearby. When Mark saw what was happening, he immediately called the team leader. He wanted to report that the guy she was saving was not far from him. The girl asked Mark if he was sure you were really there. Mark didn't doubt for a second that these explosions were the result of their battle. Lena was very happy because she understood that this guy had recovered and was completely fine. Grot did not understand whether this guy had already come to his senses after such a wound. Mark told Lena that it was too early to relax and that she shouldn't be happy with the girl. She asked again what he was talking about. Mark answered her that of course this guy is here, but he is not quite okay again. The judge tore him to pieces. The judge watched this guy and did not understand it was very surprising to him that he could not cope with the niche of civilization. He looked at the ashes that were left behind by his opponent and did not understand how he could recover from such damage. He didn't know where a low-level civilization got such power from, but he decided that it couldn't be left like that, so he raised his hand again to attack his opponent one last time. He decided that he had to put an end to this, so he rushed to attack the enemy. At that moment, he heard the voice of the registrar Kiranos, who demanded that he stop immediately. The judge wanted to finish his case, but he was not allowed to do so. He had no choice but to stop. He asked the registrar Kiranos why she stopped him. Did something happen? The registrar replied that this earthling, whom he had just tried to kill, had registered for the tournament. The registrar didn't understand how this could be and what kind of nonsense this was, because this guy was there the whole time. And exactly 30 minutes ago, everyone around her was shouting at her, "Register, register these earthlings." She remembered it all clearly and did not understand at what point she gave in to registering this representative of the land. Who shouted at her to register this representative as quickly as possible? She didn't understand what kind of nonsense was going on around her. She needed to get it together. The registrar stood up and said that this doesn't work against her. Everything should be in moderation. Grot answered her, "What kind of nonsense is this, and is she really an ordinary racist?" The girl said that the registrar needs to be much kinder. When they demanded that she register, she became furious because she couldn't do it, since the participant himself wasn't there. One of the crowd raised his hand and asked for forgiveness. He had something to say to the registrar. This alien said that there is a system of preliminary registration. If a participant cannot attend himself, then it can be done for him. Other aliens who were nearby said that it seemed they had heard this too, and those who hadn't heard it supported that if it exists, then it needs to be done. The registrar thought, of course, they didn't know about it because the lower civilization doesn't even need to know about it. The registrar thought that if she took advantage of the opportunity correctly, everything would not turn out so bad. So she agreed to what everyone demanded from her. She told them okay, and she will pre-register the participant without his presence. The registrar took out the forms, put them on the table, and put her hand on top. She told Lena that if she filled out the papers by hand, she would be able to register them. Otherwise, the registrar said if they do not fill in manually, then they can leave Lena Hall in the hands of these papers. Grot, when he saw these papers, he shouted to everyone to stop. He didn't understand what it all meant. After all, these documents were written in a language higher than civilization, and only higher civilizations could understand them because they used this language. So he asked how they would have to understand and fill out these documents. The registrar answered them that she did not know this, but she was very sorry. Grot was very indignant because she said that she didn't know. He demanded that she give them papers in normal language for registration. The girl replied that she didn't have any other papers. The registrar also said that this system was created to register higher civilizations. And it is logical for her that the documents will be drawn up in their languages, the language of higher civilizations. Someone from the crowd watching all this did not understand why there was such a rush to register. This opinion was supported by others because it was possible to wait until the participant came himself. Lena took a pen into her hands and began to fill out the papers that the registrar gave her. Everyone looked at the girl. They didn't understand whether she could really read the language of a higher civilization, let alone write. Lena, having read what was written there, began to answer these questions. She needed to register a representative of her planet as quickly as possible. Grot looked at the girl. He was very surprised. He asked her if she really knew this language. The registrar at that moment was simply in shock. She did not expect that the girl could know the language of a higher civilization. She screamed no, and she vomited one of Lakoff's from the girl and decided to read it herself. She didn't believe that it could be, and she thought that she was lying. She read and thought only about one thing, that a lower civilization cannot know this language because everything was calculated for this. But to her surprise, Lena knew the language and filled out the questionnaire perfectly. All those who found it did not understand where this representative of a niche race got the ability to read and write from. The registrar thought that it would be difficult for us to even recognize ordinary symbols on the earth. And in this case, she did not understand what was happening for the niche civilization, and this is on the verge of the impossible. The judge stopped, and after hearing this whole story, he thought that maybe someone was helping them. This couldn't be. It seemed to him that behind these earthlings there was someone who gave all the orders only for this. And the worst thing is that she wrote it herself, filled out this questionnaire herself. She recognized the difference between the symbols and filled out millions of words and phrases. Even if she had memorized it, it would still have been difficult for her to understand the meaning. So it turns out that she remembered not only the words, but also the structure of the sentences. This was incredible because even for the civilization to which the registrar belonged, it would have been necessary to pay. The only thing she understood was that assistance was not prohibited by law, so she simply could not cancel the registration. The judge thought that she could at least just suspend this registration, but if she didn't do it, he understood everything, and now he needs to think about it. The judge understood that the land had not found anyone who was willing to risk his life for them. He also understood that they had not found an assistant who would secretly teach them the language of a higher civilization. He had the impression that the universe itself was asking for this guy to be saved. The judge decided he had to accept it, and he was willing to close his eyes for once. But it was time to put an end to the little tricks. The judge extended his hand, and Mark watched all this and called the team leader. He reported by phone that the judge took Jin Wall and some other boy. Then he disappeared. Lena was simply outraged that it meant that Grot had disappeared. He was also outraged because Mark called his brother a non-Nick. The registrar asked everyone present to be quieter. Nothing depended on her anymore. And then she added that they shouldn't scream, but that these guys were simply transferred to the recovery room. Lena thought it was very strange, but despite everything, she thanked them for what they did now. They had to get out of there as quickly as possible. A week later in the recovery room, Mark and Lena stood near the capsule where Jin Wall was located. Mark looked at the guy. He was scared. He asked his leader if she still believed in this guy. And does she really think that this guy will be able to participate in the tournament for their civilization? The girl answered that he shouldn't worry. He will feel better soon. Someone from behind overheard their conversation. He intervened and said that he hadn't heard anything like that for a long time. When they turned around, they saw the commander of the Earth team, Clarice Eve, along with his guards. He thought that in his opinion, this guy was on the verge of his life. The team leader turned to the girl and said that he felt he had put too much pressure on her. And then he added that he would continue with the originally planned opponent for the match in 2 days. The girl asked the commander not to rush and just give her a little more time. The commander told the girl that it was enough to succumb to the influence of this swindler. A young man ran after the commander. As he approached, he pushed off the ground with all his might to make a jump. He actually succeeded and jumped so high that he jumped over the commander himself and landed in front of him. Landing in front of the commander, he lowered his head and knelt down. This guy told everyone that they should trust him. He can solve all their problems. Then he introduced himself and said that he was the strongest fighter and his name was Marcel Blade. He was a representative of the Earth. The girl could not stand all these situations. She turned to the capsule and began to hit it with her fists. She demanded that Jin Wall come to her senses. The captain came closer to her, put his hand on her shoulder, and told her not to worry. He said that now Marcel is the strongest Earthling, and he personally chose him, so they have a chance. And also his suit is the pinnacle of knowledge accumulated by humanity. The captain also added that after this competition, no civilization would dare to look down on Earthlings. One of the civilizations that participated in this tournament was the civilization of the Visors. It occupied 10,320th place in the civilization rating. Their home planet was made up of extremely hard rock, lava, and poisonous gas erupted from all sides, making it the planet commonly referred to as Adam. The Vizier civilization is a civilization that has developed its bodies to survive in this hell. And this time, the enemy of the Earthlings was Crocs Jaybrick. He was famous for his innate physical abilities. Lena stood in front of the screen and said that they need to pay attention to the fact that he has quite good physical abilities, and they said that this is all good. This is enough. Put out another cigarette. The captain's assistant said that their enemy is a first-level civilization, and it is the same as Earthlings. He stopped her because he thought that the lady from the center had given a sufficient explanation. This old man picked his nose with his finger and started saying that they should leave the rest to him, and she can come back. This was the coach of the martial arts team of the championship of this planet, Marshall Steele. He explained that she had friction with the aliens and the center was completely destroyed, and he didn't say it exactly because she had no time to return. He should have been more careful in his expressions. At that moment, the notification system lit up, indicating that there would be some kind of announcement. It was indeed said that the fighters who will participate in the next match should go to the waiting area. The coach stood up and started to stretch his arms. He said that they should go out into the arena first. Lena told everyone to wait a minute, but no one wanted to listen to her. Everyone turned around and started to leave. The girl tried to explain to them that the strategy she was trying to develop was very important for this match. The coach turned around, raised his hand, made her stop, and told her that that was enough. No one wanted to listen to her. He also told her that nothing more was required of her and that she just needed to enjoy the game. She didn't understand. She demanded to be heard. But no one wanted to hear her. She didn't understand why they were so confident in their victory. The girl tried to explain to them that maybe they don't know the whole truth because they only lived on Earth, but these aliens don't understand earthly common sense. And depending on the strategy and analysis of the probability of destruction of a superior civilization, it is different. In other words, victory or defeat is determined precisely by the strategy. She also added that, moreover, the Earth's power is at the lowest level even in the universe. At that moment, the captain turned his head and looked at her. He raised his gun and fired in her direction. He couldn't accept what she said. The captain told her that he didn't think it was right to say that to his teammates right before the match. And then I added that she apparently spends too much time in space and doesn't understand at all how to talk to Earthlings. And also, most likely, she ignores Earthlings too often. The trainer was a little scared. He didn't even expect that this old man would really be able to take and shoot. At that moment, he told her that they had not spent 100 years on the Earth for this competition, but they had also spent an incredible budget and a lot of manpower. Marcel looked at the girl and asked her again. Now everything is clear to her why he is considered the strongest on Earth. After which he put the helmet on his head, and he was ready to enter the arena for the fight. He looked at the girl again and told her to trust this body that he has. Then he turned around and went into the waiting room and asked her to please support him when he was in the arena. Then he laughed very loudly, but the girl remained standing in place. She understood that this could be a loss. At that moment, the announcer who was making the announcement told all the respected spectators that they had been waiting for this fight for a long time. Then he added that they were starting and would start with the match of the 8th preliminary round. Mark sat in front of the TV and watched everything that was happening. Besides watching, he also ate and thought about when his team leader would come. In fact, the thoughts were materialized, and the next moment he saw her hand on his products. She took what he was eating and asked if it was edible at all. Mark turned his head and was glad that she had come. Mark immediately told her that he accidentally met several people who said that they were not her acquaintances. She did not understand who they were talking about. Well, then she saw that it was Grot, his brother. They were waiting for her together with Mark. When the girl saw them, she asked if they were following her, to which they replied that they had met by chance. Absolutely by chance. Grot looked at the girl and said, "Isn't their team unlucky with draws?" And then he added that this opponent is practically a free win for a guy like they registered. The two who came to support them did not understand what kind of reaction the Earthlings were having. When they turned their heads and looked at the screen, the announcer said to greet the fighter who would represent the Earth. He said that the civilization rating is 12,700th at the very bottom of the list, and there is no more retreat. It was a representative of the Earthlings. His name was Marcel Blade. Grot, when he saw all this on the screen and heard, he was also confused. He did not understand where the guy they registered had gone. He couldn't hold back and started yelling at the girl who this guy was. Was he a representative of their planet? His brother at that moment said that it was worse that the psycho had not yet come out of the recovery capsule. The girl asked how it was. Then he told her that they probably don't know what it's like to be in this capsule. Lena assumed, but now she spoke out that in her is a force suppressor. Precisely from this, he cannot get out of this capsule. He answered her that this is exactly how it was when he was in this capsule. They attached a force suppressor to his wrist, and he had it the whole time until he left the recovery capsule. Depending on the creature, the location and form of suppression may differ, but that person definitely has the device. He said that she should remember and think carefully, no length of his body, anything suspicious. The girl thought about what suspicious she saw on his body. She thought that now that she knew the truth about it, it seemed to her that he had something on his neck. Mark continued to eat. He asked everyone what a force suppressor is and how it works. The girl answered that it is a dress that suppresses cosmic force. From the name, everything should be clear. She also added that some abilities can easily take life with their short-term use. Civilizations possessing cosmic power are obliged to use under pressure on other planets. In addition, it is assumed that the fighter's equipment should never be worn outside of arena. Then Mark asked them again if the fighting skills he uses are not martial arts, or if they are something similar to martial arts. The girl answered him that she assumes that this is a cosmic force and super recovery is a rare ability, although it is well known. However, the various abilities of the Earthlings of the past that Jinwoo told her about are too diverse to be classified as cosmic powers. She didn't understand that this was supposed to happen on Earth until this guy was sealed. While she was thinking, the announcer's voice sounded and said that now he needed to introduce the next fighter. The announcer said that this is a species that survived in one of the worst ecosystems in this vast universe. He said that the civilization rating is 10,320th, and this is a representative of the Vizirov civilization. The representative, who was supposed to go out into the arena, now called his assistant and told him to go and check if he looked the same as the Earthling. His assistant quickly ran to look at the Earthlings. He needed to give a Cloud an answer. When he came running and looked, he told your representative that because of the mask, it was hard to tell what this Earthling looked like, but he thought he looked like all Earthlings were very similar in their build. He stepped forward and said that he had heard that this Earthling would definitely be a representative of the Earth. Then he asked his assistant again, "So this is the same guy who arranged the explosions here?" "That's exactly it." The audience was so excited they were waiting for Crocs to come out, so they kept shouting his name. They couldn't calm down. They were waiting for him to finally come out and for this fight to begin. They were shouting Crocs. At that moment, the second fighter who was supposed to participate in this battle came out. He had 3 balls in his hands and he took it step by step. When it became visible, the audience was very surprised because it was not Crocs at all. Although the announcer, when the second fighter came out, said that it was Croc's Jabrick, when the fighter was practically in the arena, then it became clear to everyone that it was not him at all, but no one knew who it was yet. The announcer started to loudly curse at this fighter. He didn't understand who he was to participate in someone else's fight without permission. This guy said that he is a representative of the Pixie civilization, and his name is Twinnis. The Pix civilization represented 1,300th place in the ranking. Mark was also very surprised. Was it really the Pixie civilization, and why did they do that? Why did they change their enemy? The announcer didn't understand what was going on. He asked again, not because he was just curious about who he was. He asked because this guy had interfered with the tournament and he had to bring Crocs with whom he was supposed to be on the same page. This guy answered him that Crocs can't take part in Tambov, and he said that he went out instead of him. The announcer was very upset. He didn't understand what this guy was talking about, and he shouted for him to immediately leave the arena and not take part in this tournament. The spectators were outraged. They didn't understand what had happened to their fighter and didn't consider this guy who entered the arena to be crazy. The announcer and judge of this tournament couldn't stand it, and he shouted for them all to shut up. His scream was so loud that half of the audience went to grow varieties in dry land. After which the judge hit the table with his fist. He wanted to restore order. No one had the right to change the rules without his permission. The judge yelled at the guy that he was a little freak and that he better think carefully about what he was going to say next. This guy looked up at the judge and said, "They better get down to business then." This guy was talking about how he was a fighter who had never been punished, but this earthling who was in front of him was a murderer who had killed an innocent representative of his civilization. The audience did not understand why he was saying this. Could the Earthlings and the Pixie civilization really have entered into battle? It was simply impossible, and it was funny. The guy said that it is, of course, very difficult to believe, but that is exactly how he said it, that everyone knows perfectly well that they are wearing pressure equipment. And this Earthling who stood in front of him, an evil bastard, took advantage of his blindness to kill his fellow man. He asked to give him a chance to take revenge on this bastard. When everyone heard what this guy was talking about, they didn't think that it was true and that it could have happened, but everyone thought that the office on Z Street was really completely destroyed. Mark looked at all this happening and told his leader that this was completely untrue. The girl turned away and said that it was no longer important at all. She believed that common sense told her that such a proposal would never be accepted. The judge of this tournament agreed with this guy and said that he could participate in the fight instead of Crocs. The judge thought that if a warrior who risks his life to avenge his people interferes in someone else's fight, it is much more interesting than broadcasting the matches of these damn bastards without personal motivation and thirst for blood. Lena was simply outraged. She asked them to wait a minute. She did not understand why they did this. Mark tried to stop her, but he did not succeed. The judge heard someone asking him to wait a minute, and he decided to listen to them. Someone from the civilization that Crocs represented asked what would happen to their civilization then. At that moment, someone threw a round object at the alien and his head flew into pieces. Mark asked the girl to put her hand down because the same thing could happen to her the next moment if she asked a question. The announcer and the judge said that he understands everything. The beginning of this fight has been dragging on for too long, so he demands that this fight finally begin. He said that he would like to introduce a fighter who, at his personal discretion, will act in place of the civilization. Visor representative of the Earthlings did not understand what was wrong with his head and what was happening to him in general. The announcer said that the civilization occupying 1,300th place is the representative of the best mechanical civilization in the universe, the Pixie Fighter Twinkies civilization. And then he added whether this fighter will be able to successfully avenge his people in this life-threatening competition. Thus, this match began. The announcer said that they would now begin the third match of the 8th preliminary round group. The spectators who were sitting and watching this match started shouting that the death of a murderer is the death penalty, that this Earthling should be executed. Commander Claris watched everything that happened in the arena on the big screen. The representatives of the Earthlings who were with him in the same room asked him why he was so calm about this. He looked to the side and saw a girl there who was asking him why he was chilling out here so calmly. She demanded that he file a protest with the Tournament Management Committee right at that moment. The commander did not understand what he had to protest against. The girl tried to explain to him that he should protest against a player who was changed in the middle of the match. This was clearly a violation of the tournament rules. The captain took his cigar, took a few puffs, and then said that he would change after this protest. The girl did not understand what he meant. In fact, the referee had just continued the match, and it was almost impossible to stop it. This match was continued by one of the 6 gods of Selenium. It was the host of the tournament of the 3rd district, and his name was Ensapian Leviathan. The captain told the girl that it was impossible because no one could stop God's decision. She slammed her hands on the table in despair. She didn't know what else to do. Then she turned around and walked away from that place, but she couldn't give up so easily. She understood perfectly well that the rules of the tournament were not being followed from the very beginning, and if they were doing this, then she decided that she would treat these rules the same way they did. The audience was delighted. They shouted for the killer to be punished. They wanted blood. The representative of the dugout who stood in the ring did not understand what mood the spectator was in. Stones were thrown in his direction. And most importantly, he did not understand what kind of new opponent who was standing in the arena would now enter into battle with him. This was not the same guy he met at the morning briefing, so things didn't go according to the rules. He thought that something must have gone wrong and that his suit had problems too, although he knew that it didn't matter. Marcel, the representative of the Earthlings, understood that despite the fact that something was wrong with his suit, he would still have to engage in battle with the enemy. So he had no choice but to pull himself together and start attacking. After all, in reality, his goal had not changed. He had to win this battle so that his civilization could rise to a higher level. He looked at his opponent and thought that he must destroy the enemy before he destroys him for the sake of humanity. Marcel didn't wait long and attacked his opponent, trying to damage him, but his opponent managed to move to the side. Marcel thought that this guy had good reactions. Then he turned around and said that from now on they would start for real. He had no other choice, and he went on the attack again. He pushed off the ground and rose up to attack his opponent from a high position. Marcel began to attack his opponent from several sides, but his attacks did not achieve their goal. Mark was a little surprised by everything that was happening because he thought it was complete madness, and this guy wasn't joking at all. Grot, when he looked at this battle, he thought that this Earth was not coping much better than he thought. And his brother thought that Twinkies was simply merciless against the constant attacks of the Earthling. The next attack of the Earthling was hyper-interaction. He concentrated all his power into a single fist in order to strike his opponent. A second later, he delivered his blow. No one who was watching this fight expected this. The blow was really powerful. Even Marcel himself rose even higher so that the shockwave would not hit him. Here the impact was more like a huge explosion with a certain shockwave that blew everything around away. The force of the impact was so great that half the stadium was shattered into pieces, after which the Earthling landed to see what happened. Everyone was waiting to see if this was the end for Twinkie. The captain and his assistants were only hoping for it. At that moment, everyone was watching as Marcel made a gesture that confirmed his victory. The captain looked at Marcel and thought of only one thing, that he had once again accomplished a mission that was impossible. Everything was just like on that day when he first met him. It was during the war that it seemed like they had no chance of survival. The enemy laughed because he had a numerical advantage. He wanted to know where the great general and their government were hiding. The enemy demanded that he simply surrender and leave the moment he learned of the location of their clan. His death was already predetermined. The captain then told another soldier who was with him to listen to him carefully. The captain said he would distract the enemy so he could slip away and report their location to headquarters. The captain then ordered that they must destroy this group of bloodthirsty criminals. The opponents did not know where exactly the captain was, so they listened to every rustle that came from him. Unexpectedly for them, they heard shots. They rushed to the place where these shots were coming from. One of them said that these little rats were hiding right there. Marcel couldn't hold back and fired several bullets from his machine gun upwards. The captain didn't understand what he was doing. Then Marcel said that this is the second mission from him, and then he added that he can destroy these criminals. He is ready to deal with them right away. The captain tried to stop him and tell him not to act like a fool, but it was too late. Marcel had already taken several steps forward. When the criminals saw Marcel, they started shouting that there were government soldiers there, after which Marcel's voice could be heard shouting for them to die. The captain thought, what kind of monster is this guy? He doesn't fall even after a bullet hits him. He still continues his fight. After a few seconds, Marcel returned. He had one of the hostages in his arms. He wanted to prove to the captain that he could handle it himself. After which Marcel said that maybe in order to complete the task, they should return to headquarters together. Unexpectedly for everyone, when the smoke began to develop, a silhouette appeared. Could it really be Marseille's enemy? Yes, that's exactly it, and it was Twixen, so the match wasn't over yet, and Marcel rejoiced too early. This guy was actually injured his concussion. The guy just stands there and doesn't move, but he's actually alive. Marcel thought he was a little surprised because this guy has good stamina if he can still stand in this case. What happened next? No one could even expect. Marcel felt some pain on his left side. When he turned his head, he saw his hand fly to the side. He did not understand when this happened and what it was. The captain was also very upset by everything that was happening before his eyes. He certainly did not expect such a turn of events. The announcer said that in one moment Marcel's left arm was torn off. For this, his opponent only had to raise one finger. Marcel was bleeding. He was not as confident as a few minutes ago. There was only one thought in his head. How could this happen? After all, he was wearing a suit, one of the new developments that was supposed to protect him. Marcel's opponent told him, doesn't he understand, and is still surprised by something? Hasn't he seen this trick fight with his children? Marcel didn't understand what was happening and what he was talking about because he certainly didn't know any of his children and didn't fight with anyone. At that moment, everyone could see how the enemy struck and tried with all his might to finish him off at Marseille. Marcel couldn't stay on his feet and started falling backwards. It seemed like he wouldn't be able to get up again. Twinkies, after this blow, asked if this guy really killed Pika. He had deep doubts. So he asked his assistant Flock to check on this guy who was lying on the ground. Flock, who couldn't get close, tried to look at Marcel from afar, after which he shouted to his master that no, this is not that guy, this is a completely different one. Twinkies took a few steps forward and said that this is exactly what he knew. Such a weakling could not kill their Pika. And then he added that neither Pick nor Flock could have suffered from such a moron who was now lying in the arena. Twinkies approached Marcel to tell him to answer him just one question. Where is the real Earthling here who was able to harm the representatives of his civilization? The announcer was delighted that Twinkies was tearing off Marcel's leg at that moment. He said that Marcel Kurshi Ka could not survive the pain because the captain was so attached to him. The announcer said that it looked like it would be impossible to change the situation. It was a complete loss for the Earthlings. And in fact, it didn't look like a match anymore. It looked like a real war with torture. Twinkies, he did not stop, and every minute mocked the representative of the Earthlings, causing him damage. He held out and started screaming for you, the alien bastard, to calm down and not kill their representative. The coach shouted to Marcel that the match was already over. He just needed to say that he was giving up, and then he would stay alive. Marcel didn't understand what the coach wanted from him and what he meant by that, why he had to give up despite the fact that he was bleeding. Marcel answered him that this was a mission on which the lives of 1 billion people depended, and he could not just give up. Despite the pain he was experiencing, he was not going to give up, and his opponent was inflicting more and more damage on the representative of the Earthlings. Moreover, he didn't need any special strength for this. His minimal capabilities were enough. With just one of his fingers, he could lift it up and then hit the ground with all his might to damage it even more. Despite all the pain that Marcel was experiencing, he tried to strike his opponent. But then the announcer said that Marcel's last powerful blow was blocked, and everyone understood that he couldn't do anything. Then he said that it looks like this is the end of the Earthlings' path. You were there in the tournament, they were in the lowest place, and they still remain. Lena was simply outraged after these words. She did not understand why he was saying that. She didn't agree with what everyone said, that their way was over. At that moment, she threw something towards the arena. The security of this doja tournament blocked her, but the girl screamed that everything was just beginning. She was told that her behavior was wrong and that she was throwing garbage at someone else's stadium. She needed to clean it up as soon as possible. Lena screamed at Marcel with all her might that he had really held up well, and now she needed to entrust her mission to this guy she had thrown into the arena. Flock shouted to his prince that the very same guy had appeared in the arena. He was the one who killed Mr. Peak. Twinkies looked to the side. Was his subordinate really talking about the trash that just flew in? Jinwoo was thinking about only one thing, how his head hurt, and his opponent didn't understand what was happening. He looked at this guy because he just didn't show any signs of life and already stood up. Jinwoo thought about her headache and about that bastard who he would definitely kill the next time he saw him. Opening his eyes, the first thing he thought about was where he was. He needed to assess the whole situation. The first thing that caught his eye was an Earthling who couldn't stand up. The announcer said that Marseille was finally on its knees, and the situation was hopeless. There was no more chance for a counterattack. Grot, watching everything that was happening, said that it was all predictable. Although he still hoped for a different outcome of events, the forces were too unequal. Mark didn't understand where the team leader had gone. He decided to call her. It looked like they had been thrown out of this tournament. The representative who called him told him to come over immediately. It was all very sudden. Mark said that he was already on his way. He didn't understand why they were scolding him so loudly. He immediately got up and ran. He needed to meet his team leader as quickly as possible. The young man looked around. He needed to determine where the gate number 5 was. When he came closer, he realized that it was somewhere here. At that moment, he heard someone's voice that he needed to release the patient. The alien shouted that further resistance would only lead to violence, but despite all this, she ran and held on as if on her shoulders. Lena ordered her assistant to stop these aliens as quickly as possible because they don't have any time at all. Mark, when he saw all this, ran faster than his team leader. The girl shouted at him to stop. She didn't understand where he was going because she ordered him to stop these aliens. Mark told her that he had no idea how he was supposed to stop something like that. He asked her what she was doing. She looked like a crazy woman. The girl turned around, looked at him, and said that she gives hope to the Earthlings to win this tournament. Mark looked at this guy who was hanging upside down with his tongue hanging out and asked her that she was probably making fun of him. Lena said that she doesn't want to waste her energy and will explain everything later. But for now, he needs to do what she asks. He had to hold off these aliens for at least a little while so she could get to the place. At that moment, she hit Mark right in the face. He couldn't hold on and fell. These two started shouting that a patient had appeared. They didn't grab Mark. He didn't want them to take him and shouted for them to let him go and not grab him. The girl shouted to him that she would never forget him. Flock, after not recognizing Marcel, stood and wondered where those Earthlings who had harmed them had gone. At that moment, Lena ran right in front of him. She was carrying on her shoulders the same guy with whom he had already dealt. The security told her to stop, and this was the last warning. The girl moved at high speed. Flock at that moment recognized the guy hanging on her shoulders as the same offender. The announcer at that moment was saying that it looked like this was the end of the Earthlings' path in the tournament. But Lena didn't think so. She threw the guy right into the arena to continue this competition. She shouted to the judge and the announcer that they should not even dream that the land would not surrender so easily. This time it was detained. They reported that the conquest was successful. The announcer and judge of this tournament looked at the arena, and he had only one question. What is he doing, and what did she throw into the arena? After which, he ordered everyone to calm down and said to collect the trash that this woman threw into the arena immediately. Lena understood that they wouldn't be able to do this because they didn't understand what kind of trash she had thrown into the arena. She tried to tell them that this trash single-handedly defeated 2 adult representatives of the Pixie civilization, and this is the one who fought on equal terms with the judge of the 3rd District with Vitus. This is the representative of the Earth. His name is Jin Wall, and he is a crazy demon. Pan on when the video of everything that happens in the arena, he finally realized that he waited for this moment. It was the case because of which he watched this battle. When the viewers heard everything she said, many of them thought that it was definitely a lie and that it couldn't be. But some thought that it was clear that there had been explosions on the street quite recently. Maybe it was true. The girl demanded that they accept the substitution of the opposing player in order to take revenge. Then she brought them the real target in place so that the judge of this one, who is Nira, and the owner of this tournament had to approve this replacement. Everyone was shocked because the way she addressed the owner of this tournament was very bold. The host of this tournament thought that this was pretty good for an Earthling. If he was really that strong, then why wouldn't he join the fight? But it was already too late, he thought, and the match was over, despite everything the owner of this tournament said, that they cannot restart a match that is already over. At that moment, Marcel started shouting that he wasn't there yet. He shouted that he was Marcel, and he hadn't lost this match. Everyone looked at him. They were surprised that he was actually still alive and could speak. Only after these words did the host of this tournament agree with their proposal and said that he would allow the players to be replaced. The captain took another drag on his cigar and appreciated Marcel's good work. Lena licked the ground. She understood that she had done a lot and thought that this was enough. With this, the future of the Earth. The guards picked her up, ordered her to shut up, and told her that she had to go with them. The guards explained to the girl that she would make her fool pay for this commotion. Twinkies looked at this guy who flew in and did not understand whether he really destroyed 2 adult pixies. This guy lying on the ground seemed like he was about to die. He was of no use, and so the representative of the Pixie civilization thought that he had already won. He came closer to him. He wanted to clarify whether he was alive or not because he was lying and not moving. When he came closer, the young man's eyes lit up bright red at that moment. Twinkies had never seen anything like this before, so he stopped. He didn't understand what to do next. Jinwal raised his head and cursed very loudly. His head hurt like never before. His opponent was surprised because right before his eyes, this guy had completely recovered. Jinwal looked from side to side. He wanted to understand where he was. The announcer began to talk about how this trash, that is, he meant the representative of the Earthlings named Jin Wall, was restored and resurrected. The host of this tournament thought that this guy has pretty good regeneration abilities. This match might be more fun than he even thought. Jin Wall. When he looked around, he realized that it had been very noisy here just recently now. He needed to figure out where he had ended up. Turning to the other side, he saw his opponent, who told him that he had been looking for him for a long time, and who declared that he would finally be able to avenge his compatriots who died at his hands. The guy looked at his opponent and thought that he had the same aura as those he saw during the day. He didn't care about weaklings like him. The announcer said that this is a completely incomprehensible situation because the representative of the Earthlings, a fighter who was just supposed to enter the battle, suddenly turns his back on his opponent and leaves the stadium. The guy thought that he needed to urgently find the girl Lena and demand an explanation from her of what all this meant. At that moment, when he was almost gone, he felt someone grab his hand. Jinwoo turned to look at his opponent and said that it was really unpleasant, but he has no dealings with weaklings. After which, he felt how his opponent lifted him up and held him there. Jinwoo looked questioningly at his opponent. Did he really think he didn't understand that he could do the same as his representatives? On the other hand, he thought if this guy doesn't understand ordinary speech, then he tried his best to be condescending, after which he swung to hurt him. And the first thing he did was hit him on the head so that it was all round. After this blow, Jinwoo felt that something was wrong with him and he couldn't hit with full force. He looked at his hand, which was almost destroyed, and realized that he had suspicions that something had happened to him. His opponent was with us, only he shouted that the guy killed his friends and most likely he decided to mock their entire civilization. Then he started shouting that such a lowly race to which he belongs is more like worms than a civilization at all. Twinkies grabbed the guy, threw him over his shoulder, and slammed him into the ground with all his might. Everything that happened made Jinwoo very angry, but he was not going to give up. So he jumped over this guy's head and stood right in front of him, ready for the next attack. Well, when he looked at his hand, he thought that this cripple was doing something to his body, and he couldn't use any other martial arts except the art of the immortal god. So he shouldn't despair. He decided that he had what he had, and at that moment his opponent struck with a giant fist. Then the guy decided that they should fight in the old manner. He wanted to impose his own course of action on him. Twinkies, after this blow, split his opponent in half, so that one half was on top and the other somewhere below. Jinwoo. When he got up, he told his opponent that someone from an insignificant race could really do what he does. After which he took his finger and pierced his eye. Blood spurted out in all directions. Despite the fact that his body was split in half, the guy was unable to inflict damage on his opponent and gouge out his eyes so that he could not see anything. His opponent was screaming very loudly, so he stuck his finger in his mouth and pulled his tongue. The opponent tried with all his might to bite off his finger, and he helped him with this by hitting him on the jaw from below with his fist. Jinwoo ordered his opponent to eat it immediately and forced him to swallow it. At that moment, Twinkies slammed his opponent with all his might, so that it seemed that only blood splashes remained from him. There was nothing left on the stage except the guy's lower half. There was only a pool of blood. The owner of this tournament said that Twinkies really has incredible strength, and he was able to destroy his opponent. He literally tore his upper body into pieces. Twinkies felt a wild pain, he shouted to his opponent, not understanding what he was fed. He told the guy that as soon as he recovers, he will destroy him again, to which he heard an objection. Then the guy said that he had another gift for such an opponent, and this gift was his hands that were coming out of his mouth. Jinwoo told his opponent not to rush and wait a bit because there's more to come. Twinkies felt a wild pain and felt that his body was simply being torn into many pieces. He lowered his head and saw that the guy had almost recovered. He extended his hand to him. The announcer began to shout very loudly that the upper part of the body of the Earthling representative Jinwoo was completely destroyed. He was wondering if regeneration could help a representative of Earthlings in such a state. His doubts disappeared literally in a few seconds. He screamed that this couldn't be happening. Hands started to appear from Twinkie's mouth. He made an assumption that this was really an Earthling. Jinwoo used the energy generated during regeneration to launch an attack. In other words, he used a biological bomb. However, Twinkies dislocated his lower jaw to escape the deadly attack. Grot, who was watching everything that was happening in the arena, said that he didn't even know that regeneration abilities could also be used for attacks. Everyone watched with bated breath what was happening in the arena. They understood that if Jinwoo made one or two such attacks, in this match, the Earth will not be able to turn the outcome of events in their favor. His ability to fight, unfortunately for the Earthlings, this attack was their only chance of victory. They looked and understood that Twinkies would not give them such an opportunity again, and that in this case the Earthlings would have zero chance of winning. Grot turned his head and saw that one of the aliens sat down next to them. She asked him why he sat down, and the alien answered that you can't be so mean. And then he added that he was pleased to meet you. He is an ordinary galactic journalist. His name is Akraman, and he is from the Inferior civilization. This journalist added that he became interested in their brother after he was able to defeat Agni. And what's more, he said that he knew that he blocked the attack from the invincible Virtus. They didn't understand where he found out about it. Panin looked at the journalist and said that very few people know that he was involved in that fight. And what did the journalist answer him? He already said that he is a journalist and he has his own methods. Then Panion asked the journalist why he thinks that the chances of Earth winning are zero, because their fighter fought with Judge Virtus and showed what he is capable of. The journalist replied that even if the judge used only 1% of his strength, it is incredible that the boy survived. Well, in fact, he believes that all this happened only because he has the ability to regenerate, and a monster who barely managed to survive is not fit to hold a candle to a proud warrior. Well, even if we consider that he was able to survive the battle against the judge, then his abilities are equal to at least a third-level civilization. The journalist didn't know what to say in response. He moved his gaze to the arena where important events were taking place. After thinking for a bit, the journalist said that just because of one victory, one should not underestimate representatives of a higher-level civilization. And one cannot underestimate the centuries of experience of a civilization occupying 1,300th place in the universe. It was at this moment that Jin Wall pushed off to attack his opponent in the arena. Twinkies couldn't give such an opportunity and defeat himself, so he also began to attack the Earthling. He threw at him several fiery objects that were in his hand. The journalist, who was watching and not understanding what had happened and how such a huge thing had suddenly appeared on the arena, said that it was really unexpected and that it had most likely been there from the very beginning. After thinking for a bit, they decided that if this thing was from the very beginning, then it was those same little balls that Twinkies held in his hands. Most aliens underestimate metal manipulation. I consider it simple metal telekinesis. But Twinkies can control metal at the molecular level, compressing objects to the size that fits in a pocket. And then, unexpectedly for the enemy, he can take this object out of his pocket and turn it into normal size. It was clear that with the amount of metal that Twinkies had, it was difficult to win this fight. He took metal objects out of his pockets and threw them towards his opponent. Despite the fact that the Earthling tried to somehow stop these attacks or block them, now it was clear to everyone that this Earthling who was in the arena had found himself in the most favorable situation, and he will fight with the largest warship in the universe. At that moment, he was hit. Blood spurted in all directions. Grot was indignant. He didn't understand. Did this pixie really have such power and he hit it? Did he really mock them? The journalist answered him, "Save the first-level civilizations, it might seem that way to them." Grot turned his head and looked at the journalist. He didn't understand what first-level positions meant. Did he really underestimate them that much? The journalist felt that he had made a mistake, so he began to justify himself and said that he had not tried to insult them and asked them not to be offended by him, because absolutely all civilizations participate in the tournament that is taking place. All civilizations watch it too. In other words, this tournament is held once every 100 years, where you can demonstrate technologies and features of civilization. In this case, on this stage, they reveal all their cards against ordinary Earthlings. This was surprising, if we say in other words, then in essence it meant that even if they win, they still will not lose. Moreover, the metal that the Twinies use is the material that is the heart of the Pixie civilization. The journalist said that he thinks that using this material against a first-level civilization is considered humiliating. All the wonderful knowledge that the Pixie civilization is the best blacksmiths in the entire universe. From the very moment of birth, babies on this planet contain hundreds of grams of metal in their bodies. After reaching 6 months of age, the metal is concentrated and eliminated from the body through a process called ejection. The metal that has been eliminated from the body through this process is known as soul metal. Although it is a low-strength metal with a small scope of use, each representative of the Pixie planet considers it a part of themselves and something like a guardian. However, a few years ago, a galactic alliance arrived on this planet, and after that, everything changed. The meaning of the tradition of throwing out has changed greatly, and people have started to treat it completely differently. At that moment, their peace-loving Pixie civilization, which always avoided conflicts, was miserably defeated in their very first match after joining the tournament. After this match was shown throughout the universe and was seen by many representatives of different planets, and their peaceful civilization became the object of ridicule and censure, and eventually even its resources were plundered in the name of trade. The king of this civilization, who could no longer see how his people suffer and how they are treated in the universe. He started an experiment that no one would have thought of. He needed to prove that they were still worth something. He forced newborns to be fed metal until they were 6 months old, because the king thought and believed that this accumulated metal in the body would make the metal of the soul stronger. However, in this experiment, almost all the children died because they were unable to tear off the metal, and even the soul metal of the children who barely survived was mostly useless due to the uneven flow into their bodies. However, there was also 1% whose metal was unusually strong, and among such children was the king's favorite prince, Twenice. He was one of that 1%, and he became the owner of common metal, the strongest metal in the universe. The king thought that having such a level of control was worthy of praise. Twinkies replied to his father that this was the result he had achieved during the test. Naturally, he was like that. The king, like any other father, read bedtime stories about their civilization. The king told his son that he would one day become a great warrior and be able to protect the representatives of their kind. After the king's son fell asleep, he hoped that he would understand everything and really protect their civilization. After which he got up and left. He wished his son sweet dreams. In the palace, in the corridor between other warriors, a conversation was heard about how Prince Tankus did not even pass the test. His interlocutor did not understand how this could be. Did the eternal metal not help him? Everyone thought that the king probably took him from someone else and just gave him to the prince, but they thought that was too much, and they were risking their lives for him. One of these guards said maybe he should be reborn as the next prince too. Twinkies opened the door to his room and heard this conversation. The prince jumped out and ran. He thought that this couldn't be. He needed some kind of evidence. So he ran to get this evidence because they say that the metal formed during growth is the same as the metal of the test. However, what he saw, I really liked him because this metal was of terrible quality. The components of the metal he held in his hands were completely different. Then he thought, to whom did the eternal metal he was using belong? A few days later, he held in his hands a photograph of a baby and eternal metal. It was a photograph of the family of the grandfather's assistant. At that moment, everything became clear to him. He finally figured out the truth about the eternal metal. Now he needed to figure out how to feel about it. At that moment, he heard someone's voice calling him. The prince still didn't know how to react, but he was very scared. He turned around and started screaming that he hadn't stolen it, and he didn't really know what was going on. At that moment, a strong energy came from his hand. This energy was so strong that it was able to break a cup and saucer in the opposite corner of this room. Twinkies then lowered his hand and sat down on the floor. He didn't want this to happen. He looked at his father's assistant and said that he didn't even think about using his power because his assistant was injured. The prince immediately started running and shouted that he would call a doctor now. The assistant tried to stop the prince. He told him to wait because he wanted to tell him something. The prince did not want to listen to him. He said that he would be able to listen to him much later. The assistant stopped him and told him to listen to him immediately. It was then that the assistant told the prince that his grandson had died from side effects shortly after the metal was released, and that around the same time he had heard the news of his birth from his old friend the king, and had given him the eternal metal. The assistant then added that whatever the truth, the ability to control this eternal metal is the result of all the hard work he has done. Moreover, His Highness will definitely be able to save their kingdom, and will be able to ensure that their civilization continues to live. After this conversation, the prince went to get a doctor. The doctor did come, but the assistant had already left this world. The prince still had in his hands the very same eternal metal that caused all this to happen. It was from that very day that Prince Twinkies swore to himself and his kingdom that with the use of this eternal metal each time, he will do it only for the sake of his civilization, and you will elevate their civilization above any other. That was his goal. At that moment, the announcer commented on everything that was happening in the arena and said that Jinwoo was moving. It was simply impossible. When Twinkies heard this, he stopped and turned his head. Then he thought, how could this be? But he actually saw his opponent moving. I don't understand what's going on. He stopped. Twinkies thought that even he, a representative of a third-level civilization, had almost used up all his strength. And you, this earthling who is a representative of a first-level civilization, still has energy and can move. It seemed impossible to him, but in fact the earthling was not going to give up. The announcer who commented on the ongoing battle said that it was an incredible spectacle, that earthlings were being restored despite everything. All eyes were on how the earthling was being restored. It really seemed like it would be endless, and everyone was interested in how many more times he could be reborn. Twinkies looked at his opponent. He didn't understand how this could be, but he knew he needed to do something. So he raised his right hand up and concentrated all his abilities in it. He then sent a fireball at his opponent and shouted that he was just a bastard and he would attack him until he killed him. When that fireball fell, Twinkies was sure it would hit his opponent straight, so he froze in anticipation. Imagine his surprise when he saw his opponent right next to him. He even became a little scared. Twinkies thought that this was because his opponent's movements were different from those he had before. The announcer commenting on this fight said that Jinwoo is rushing towards Twinkie Nadia at very fast speeds. The journalist noted that this is quite good, but all this is not so important anymore. He explained that the skin of adult representatives of the Pixie country is harder than all known metals, so it is not so easy to damage it. Jinwoo had already recovered his strength and tried to attack his opponent on the battlefield. The announcer commented on everything that was happening. He said that Twinkies received several blows, and the last blow from Jinwoo reached his cheek. The viewer did not take his eyes off. Then the announcer said that immediately after the Earthling struck, Twinkies immediately responded with his huge spear and struck back. His spear reaches its target and strikes very hard right on the enemy. Jinwoo started screaming in pain. Twinkies, when he saw that he succeeded this time, was pleased with his work. But the Earthling very quickly moved away from this blow and, pushing off from the ground, began to attack Twinkies. Immediately after this attack and after the grounder's blows, Twinkies is thrown back. Jinwoo pushes off again to deliver another blow to his opponent in midair. He succeeded in doing this. He practically trampled his opponent into the ground, delivering several kicks to his torso. Twinkies, falling and clenching his teeth in pain, thought of only one thing. Where did this man get so much strength from? Jinwoo was pleased with what was happening. He didn't know how it happened, but the flow of chi returned to him. At that moment, everyone again heard the commentator's voice. He was saying that it was time to end what was happening in the arena. Immediately after his words, a very strong explosion was heard right in the center of the arena where the two opponents were. The girl watching everything that was happening on the monitor thought that this powerful explosion was most likely provoked by an Earthling. This guy had other abilities besides regeneration. The announcer said that Jinwoo showed his abilities, which means that he really could be trusted. Having heard these words, she thought that he would shut up quickly and keep away from this Earthling. The explosion was really so powerful that the representative of the Pixie country who supported Twinkies and watched this battle covered his face from this strong explosion. The next moment he shouted that this couldn't be, and Twinkies had to win by any means necessary. He stood there and screamed for Prince Twinkies to somehow respond to him so that he would understand that everything was okay with him. The journalist who sat and wrote about everything that happened said that considering that he hid such abilities, this changes everything. Now Pixie is a civilization with the strong points of which are strength and defense. But this civilization does not have the reflexes to reflect such a force as now it cannot withstand such a come. Then he added that Twinkies has a very hard time creating a shield and protecting himself with this shield from his opponent's blow. The journalist looked at the guys sitting next to him and said that he could also be wrong and that they should stop reacting to all his words. Sinvol, despite the fact that Regina could regenerate her body, he thought that it was incredibly difficult. And the very next moment, his opponent struck again with a metal ball, piercing the Earthling's body right through. Twinkies was indignant about how such a small creature dares to behave like that. He shouldn't be so self-confident, and he doesn't care how many times he comes back to life. He will never be able to break through this eternal metal. Then he added, as long as there is eternal metal here, the strongest metal in the universe, the result will be the same as before. The sharp spikes of this metal pierced the Earthling's body in different places. It seemed that the Earthling didn't have a single living place. His entire body was pierced with sharp thorns. Blood was spraying in all directions. Twinkies had an amazing ability. He could control everything metal, and therefore he controlled these spikes that pierced the body of his opponent. The Earthling seemed to have already lost this battle. Twinkies attract all metal objects to itself to form a metal shield. He thought that he had already practically defeated his opponent and would be able to finish him off in this way. Player Twinkies surrounded himself with a shield of eternal metal in order to be out of reach of his opponent. He thought that even this Earthling, this bastard's ability to regenerate, was ultimately limited and based only on his energy. If he can hold out until this bastard's energy runs out, then he might win this fight. At some point, other representatives of this planet thought that maybe he stole this ability from someone else. Twinkies stood there waiting and hoping that everything would work out for him, but in reality, it was not so. The very next moment, this Earthling struck his huge hand in his face and knocked his opponent off his feet. Jinwall hit with such a huge force that he was able to break through the entire metal shield that the pixie representative was using to cover himself. Twinkies at that moment thought that this metal shield protected him, and he was the pride of their civilization. It was an eternal metal, but how surprised he was when it was broken through. Prince Twinkies shouted very loudly to him, his assistant. He wanted to tell his prince something. It was something that the representative of the Earthlings, this guy also knows how to use magnetism, and he can attract metal. What Twinkies heard he didn't like at all. He couldn't even imagine it. At that moment, he received another blow to the face with a metal object. Twinkies did not understand how a civilization at the first stage of its development could have such abilities and how representatives of this civilization could defeat him. Everyone watched the representative of the Earthlings, Jin Wall, and no one understood how he was capable of such a thing. Twinkies only had time to watch him as he restored his body and immediately after that began to attack him. Jin Wall seemed to not stop for a second. Finishing one attack on his opponent, he began the next one. And most importantly, Twinkies didn't understand how this, in his opinion, bio-garbage was ranked last. He could resist him, and most importantly, he didn't even understand at what moment it happened. But this guy dared to steal from him the eternal metal, exactly what was the property of his planet. Twinkies tried to shout at him at the last moment that he would never forgive him for this, but the shield that surrounded him began to disintegrate. Twinkies, having his powers after the shield disintegrated, put armor on his body. The Earthling dealt him several powerful blows so that even the armor could not withstand these blows. Jinwall laughed very loudly. He didn't understand why his opponent didn't need armor. It all didn't matter. He then sent several fireballs of metal towards his opponent to pierce the armor. Jinwall thought that he couldn't take control of the metal, that this guy controlled his opponent until the end. Unexpectedly for everyone, the commentator said that Jinwall tore off his own head and threw it away. In fact, it was a truly daring escape attempt using extreme regenerative abilities. Jinwall looked at this situation and did not understand what to do now. This armor that was on the enemy's body was unlikely to be easy to penetrate. On the other hand, it reminded him of his childhood and how he was taught that it wasn't he who didn't win, but he chose the wrong opponent. Then his teacher said if he wanted to attack an old man like him who was called the Invincible Iron King, he should take the Dark Lord with him. It was then that he told him that he had to personally take care of him in the best traditions of Merino. It was Mendal, the owner of the Black Turtle armor, one of the 7 treasures of the world of Murim. All the rumors about him were lies. How else to explain that he demonstrated his strength in front of a child? Then this conversation was interrupted by a young man. He told the guy in armor that he was an ordinary idiot. And then he added, "Why is he nervous? Is it because he is a little older than this boy?" Then the owner of the Black Turtle armor swung to strike the man who stood before him without a weapon. He shouted that he was an impudent scum. In fact, he was trying to show his strength in front of a very small child who could not protect himself from such a protected person. It was then that this little boy saw that the completely disarmed man who had taken his side began to attack the owner of the Black Turtle armor and flies to defeat him. Jinwall thought that this was the right decision and that this is exactly what he needed to do. He needed to attack this guy in armor. So he pushed off and headed towards Twinkies, who stood like a mountain in his armor, to give him a loading blow. In just a second, the Earthling reached his target and dealt a very strong blow to his opponent. Everything happened as expected. He dealt him a crushing blow which was called the Fist of True Chi. On that day he always remembered how he was able to defeat the guy in the Black Turtle armor without a weapon. It was then that he made the right choice by deciding to learn the technique that he saw then. And now, having used this technique of crushing Fist of True Chi, he practically put an end to this battle. The observers of what was happening on Arena stood in anticipation. I don't understand what will happen next. They all froze because the Earthling had no weapon to penetrate the armor. And for some time, Prince Twinkies, who had put on armor to defend himself, did not move. After just a few seconds, blood began to flow through all the cracks in this armored clothing. The Earthling said that now his opponent had definitely become an eternal metal. After which there was an explosion inside this armor. Blood splashed in all directions. It seemed that the prince's body simply exploded inside. The Earthling told his opponent that of course it was a very unusual metal, but it seemed he had forgotten something very important. Then he added, no matter how great the sword is, the outcome of any battle depends on whose hands it is in. He said this and laughed. The Twinkie player fell with a crash and continued to lie on the arena. His opponent, the Earthling, stood and watched him. Twinkie showed no signs of life. The metal that surrounded him was covered in blood. The commentator watching what was happening in this arena said that the verdict was that the player Twinkies cannot continue this match any further. After a pause, the commentator added that this match was over Everyone watching these matches were surprised. The observer of this match said that he now understood what the power of a first-rank civilization is. The second one answered him that if he had appeared a little earlier in the ring, their neighbor would have left faster. They meant the journalist who was sitting next to them and who was commenting on everything that was happening. In fact, about 15 billion years have passed since the birth of the universe, despite the fact that the cosmic force has always been limitless. He thought that all possible scenarios had been considered, but he did not understand why there was no information about this unusual phenomenon of Earthlings that he had just seen if it was not even in the information network of their civilization. He thought that this was most likely either the emergence of a new ability or someone had deliberately hidden it. And since it concerned Earthlings, he was very curious. Although this fight in the arena was already finished, the verdict had not yet been made. So the host and announcer of this match said that the preliminary round of Group 8, the winner of the match is, and raised his finger. He pointed his index finger at the representative of the Earthlings. Then he said that the winner was Jin Wall, the representative of the Earth. Then he added that the warrior of the first-rank civilization is victorious again. The commander, watching everything that was happening, thought that he had never imagined that such a monster was possible among Earthlings. The announcer who was commenting continued to say that perhaps right now, a historical moment had arrived and he was watching it. He wanted to introduce a representative of the Earthlings. The announcer said that there are already 3 first-ranked civilizations that have defeated the best civilizations in this tournament. He tried to say something else, but the Earthling who had just won pushed off and jumped up, swinging his arm to strike. Jin Wall said the commentator that it was his strange energy that was bothering the young man from the very beginning. Even before he struck, the guy said that he was definitely the one who stood at the top of this world. After which he used a white smoke beam towards the commentator so that he would shut up for a while. At that moment, the young man felt that his business would stop completely beyond his control, and something was happening to him. The next thing that happened was that he seemed to dissolve into space. Nothing was left of him. The only bones that remained of him fell right at the feet of the commentators. All this could be seen on the TV screen. The viewers were very surprised. The commentator and owner of these games said that he is changing his mind, and this match ends with no winner. He asked that someone remove this guy lying behind him. In fact, Mr. Leofan, one of his assistants, approached him and said that the match took first place in terms of the number of TV viewers among all the matches broadcast simultaneously. He was very surprised, and was also informed that the number of viewers of the match live had just exceeded 800 billion. This was the highest figure among the 5 regions where such matches are currently being broadcast. The highest audience ratings at the same time. He was very happy because it had been almost 900 years since he had been waiting for such a result. He then shouted that of course he would never become more popular than everyone else. Someone from behind tried to remove what was left of the Earthling. The gentleman turned his head and asked him to stop. He was wondering what he was doing there. His assistant didn't understand why he was so angry, because he himself had just said that everything should be cleaned up there. In fact, Ensapian Leviathan was declared the god of greed, and he was one of the 6 gods in existence. He believed that he could say anything to their star player. He thought for a moment, and then had to decide who they would trust to take care of their star player. Even though she found this guy, they thought that it was probably best to entrust it to someone else from the human civilization. They told her that she doesn't even understand that their civilization can't even imagine that she ruined everything in one moment. The girl was thinking about only one thing at that moment. She was interested in how things were going with the match until the middle of the game. When she watched, it seemed to her that Jin Wall was winning, but his opponent was the strongest of all that she had ever heard of. Her interlocutor tried to ask her if she was even listening to him or not. The girl replied that she had already heard about the power of Twinkies. Then he told her that she was not listening to him at all and ordered her to follow him. This creature said that Leofan wants her to take her player herself, the girl thought. If this is Leviathan who is Ensapian, then it was completely unclear why he needs it. When they approached, they heard his voice, and he was swearing that he didn't understand what this primitive Urgut was doing, and he would take the full cost of the repair from him. The assistant approached and told him that he had brought a woman from planet Earth. Leviathan looked at her and was even glad that she came. He said that he didn't call her because of something very important. He just thought that it would be difficult for the player to return to civilization on his own. That's why he called her. Then he added that it might seem a little strange, but they gave him first aid, and he gave her the hands where his remains were collected. He added if she can, and if she wants, then she can just take him to the recovery room and then everything will be fine. After some time, he opened his eyes, and I don't understand what happened to him. Raising his head and sitting up, he asked what it was and where it was located. The girl looked at him. She was very surprised and said, "Is he really alive? It's just incredible. His strength is simply endless." Jinwal had a collar on his neck. The girl said that it was a suppressor after recovery, so he could not move freely until the man asked why she was here. He got very angry, not understanding what kind of crap was on his neck. She tried to calm him down and began to explain to him that it was put on him on purpose and it would help him recover. Jinwal looked at her and said that she doesn't understand anything. He doesn't need it and no one has the right to dress him in anything. The girl tried to explain to him that he should understand who he was because he was an ordinary earthling, one of the weakest civilizations in the universe. She said that as long as he wears this necklace called the suppressor on his neck, he will be the same earthling as they all are. He listened to her until the end and told her to stop talking nonsense and take it off him right now. The girl told him not to behave like that because he can't even get out of this capsule on his own now. She thought that she couldn't do anything, so even though it was dangerous, she had to try the next method. She pressed the button. After she pressed the button, she said that she agreed, and while she was removing these shackles from his arms and legs, he would be able to calmly not move. But she never expected such a reaction from him. He grabbed her by the neck, and he told her if she didn't want him to tear her apart right now, then she had to take off what was hanging around his neck. At that moment, some footsteps and rustling sounds were heard. Someone entered the room and called the leader. This man who was looking for the leader said that she seemed to be looking for him everywhere. He asked what was going on here. He wanted to know if they were having a love quarrel. Jinwal was even more surprised when he heard these words. He didn't understand what this guy meant. The girl said that this thing that is on his neck, he will never be able to take it off on his own. She offered him to make a simple bet. Jinwal asked again what kind of bet she wanted to offer him. Then she said if he fought that guy and won, she would immediately remove the suppressor and never bother him again. But if he loses, his place in all remaining qualifying rounds will be taken by him instead of the declared representative. After some time, they left the room where he was recovering and went to the dining room where they could eat. Jinwal asked the girl when they would fight with that guy. At that moment, a purple liquid was poured onto the plate that stood in front of him. The young man added that he would tear it into pieces right now and very quickly began to eat the contents of this plate with his hands. The leader said that she doesn't understand in what sense he says this, because they only came here because he is very hungry. Jinwal looked up from his meal, looked at the girl and said that he was really damn hungry, but people like them feel this every day. The girl didn't understand. Was he really talking as if he was experiencing hunger for the first time? The young man answered her that it was not quite so, but it was a long time ago and he did not remember it well. She asked him again if it was true and people did not need food before. He looked at her and said that of course not everyone, but they were better at dealing with things like that than the current share of K. The word weakling really hurt the girl. She said he first had to defeat Marcel and then they would see what to do next. Jinwal raised his head, pointed his finger at Marcel, who was sitting opposite them, and asked if she really meant that idiot. The girl turned to Marcel and told him that he had enough food and that he should say something. Marcel replied that of course he had 40 ranks in martial arts, and in the army he had mastered all sorts of deadly techniques, even though he had lost one leg in the current battle. Jinwal looked at this guy and said that his leg does not affect the results of the tournament at all. Marcel stood up and got very angry. He said that Jinwal was an ordinary scumbag, to which he replied that he simply told the truth, so he needed to accept it as a fact and understand that he lost. Then Marcel got even more angry and started shouting that if you think about it, the guy Jinwal was to blame for the loss of his leg. He told him not to blame others for his weaknesses. The leader sat and watched them argue with each other and decided that she would not get involved in their argument in any way. When she got tired, she told them to stop. If they were both full, then it was time to decide the winner, after which they went down to the 80th floor underground, which was the training arena for these competitions. When they went downstairs and entered this arena, the girl said that they could train here so that no one would distract them. Jinwal turned around and looked at her and told her that it was possible to solve everything in the dining room. Why did it have to go so far? She answered him that the future is not his, a romantic, educated past where you can fight anywhere. Jinwal listened to her to the end. He said that he understands everything perfectly and that her future is full of cowards. Marcel approached the leader Lena and told her that he would be glad to try for the sake of the land, but he doubted that he would succeed. Then he added that he was also disgusted by this guy, but he defeated Twinkies. Then he added that even using suppression, he would not be able to resist him. He was not sure that he would be able to engage in combat with him at all. Marcel said that he did not understand at all how he would fight in such a state, because he was missing one arm and one leg. The girl said that he wasn't worried at all. She thought everything through, and she thought about this too. Leader Lena told Jin Wall to wait here for a minute. Something needs to be prepared. The guy was a little surprised. He didn't understand what she was going to prepare because he thought that they wouldn't even bother here. Then he looked at the expression on his opponent's face and asked him if everything was okay. At that moment, the girl sat down on one knee and took out the box, making several movements that were understandable only to her. Marcel asked her what she was doing and what it was. She told him that it was his new leg and he had to try it on. The girl said that at first it would be uncomfortable, but over time, he would adjust to this leg and would be able to walk calmly. Marcel asked if this was a prosthesis from the planet Artinos. Lena answered him that yes. She was glad that he immediately recognized Marcel because he was very expensive, and how could she get him? The girl replied that she had a small stash, and her colleague also took part in this. In fact, her colleague didn't even know that his money had disappeared. The girl said that in fact, she had not spent that much to buy this prosthesis. Marcel looked at the girl and thanked her. He said that this time, he would give it his all, even if victory cost him his life. She said that there was no need to do that. Jinwoo couldn't wait for this battle to happen. He asked how long they were still preparing. He wanted to take off this collar as soon as possible. Marcel threw off his cloak and told him to wait here. He was already on his way. He was ready to fight him. Lena shouted after Marcel to stop and listen to her. She said that she needed to tell him something before the battle. Jinwoo, when he saw the enemy in front of him, he thought they were preparing something grandiose, but it was just a toy leg. After a while, everyone was standing on their part of the field, and it was necessary to come together on command and start attacking. Marcel shouted at his opponent to shut up and not to dare to speak like that about the prosthesis he had on his leg. Leader Lena looked at the man and said that she thought so too, and that he shouldn't get cocky. When Jinwoo heard this word about him being arrogant, he just started laughing. He prepared himself to lek, but at that moment he said that he doesn't do that, and he is completely confident in his abilities. After which he pushed off and jumped up to strike his opponent, who tried to avoid this blow. But Jinwoo managed to hit his opponent on the head with all his might in the first attack. He adopted offensive tactics, while his opponent Marcel blocked the blows and retreated back. Marcel did not understand what kind of movement he was trying to make to attack Nogan in order to get away from these attacks. Jinwoo tries to throw one punch and then another one, felt like his hands were tied and his movements were limited. He couldn't carry out a single blow to the very end. It seemed that something was happening to him. His opponent at that moment successfully dodged these blows and attacks. Marcel realized that something was wrong with his opponent, so he could still show himself in this battle. He immediately grabbed the lock, and with his leg, on which he had his grandfather's prosthesis, he struck his opponent in the jaw with all his might so that he fell back. He made only one blow to his opponent, and this blow Dusty hit his target, and his opponent was no longer so confident. The girl who was watching everything that was happening was pleased with the outcome of this battle. Marcel stood, and right in front of him lay the same guy who had just defeated a very strong opponent. Marcel thought that everything happened as she said before this battle, so that he would not worry about the last battle. And if he fights as usual without problems, he will defeat this guy. Then he asked her why she is sure about it. But if it is so, then he will try and do it. The girl told him not to worry because at that moment he was unlikely to harm anyone. He wanted to know why. The girl said that this suppressor was created without taking into account lower civilizations. In fact, when most systems in this Galactic Federation were developed, these temporary registration systems were initially created for the convenience of higher civilizations. And as strange as it may be, the interests of lower civilizations, such as the Earth and other civilizations, were not taken into account at all. Figuratively speaking, it's like giving a mouse a dose of anesthesia equal to an elephant. The girl said that they have not yet started martial arts, so the power of control is unknown. After the battle begins, the suppressor can act even stronger when he begins to use force. Leader Lena, after one of her protégés fell, decided to go up to him and see what happened to him. This suppressor that is worn on his neck has been used since the second-level civilization. It was unclear how she knew the side effects of its use on a representative of the first-level civilization. In fact, it took quite a long time to find out all this. 20 years in the past, the Galactic Federation did not pay attention. This is why this suppressor could be observed on the second-level representatives in the system of trading creatures throughout the universe. In fact, she learned a lot. I live where I was afraid to even breathe so as not to simply become dead, but now she will use this information as a weapon. She was ready to join the fight and said that they were waiting impatiently for the damned and the aliens. When Marcel landed one blow with his prosthetic to his opponent's jaw, he fell and attacked. All this took place on the 80th floor underground in the training room. Jinwoo raised his head and then began to rise himself. He did not understand what was happening to him and why he was so weak. He thought if only it weren't for that fucking collar that was on his neck at that moment. The girl told Marcel to finish for today because she needed to go back. Marcel walked up to the young man who was lying on the floor and looked down at him. He asked the leader if this training they were doing now would definitely help him in the next battle. He turned to her and added that he even said that if it weren't for this collar, he would have already dealt with it, and in this case, he is the same as him. The girl, having heard his speech, answered about how he thinks he is different from higher civilizations, to which Marcel knew the answer for sure, that he does not use cosmic power. She then said that on a small scale this is exactly so, but if you think much more broadly, these are abilities that contradict the laws of physics and common sense. She was saying that it was wrong to make the whole body burst into flames, or else create a new weapon. All this is beyond their understanding. But for a higher civilization, such changes are already natural, and they very often use them in battles. Maybe if their civilization can rise, and they have the same privileges, they too will be able to fly without the help of technology, or will be able to grow 8 legs. And the criteria for such an opportunity depends on the knowledge present in a civilization of a certain rank. The amount of knowledge of higher civilizations is never compared with their amount of knowledge. And a lot depends on how they use this knowledge. If they don't know something, they can find themselves in a very disadvantageous position. In the case of Jin Wall, for example, there was increased attention to him in the first round, and it was not very good. Therefore, there was a high probability that this entire action had already been analyzed at this point. Jin Wall tried to pounce on his opponent. The leader said that for Jin Wall, dodging or defending are secondary methods, he can only attack. At that moment, Marcel parried his blow and once again threw his opponent to the ground. The leader continued to say that this was a common fighting technique and that for aliens capable of regeneration, this would become his weak point in the next battle. Marcel then noticed that if you think about it, their leader already treats him like an alien, but in fact, he was definitely an Earthling. The girl then told him not to worry about it. Even though he looks like an alien, he is 100% genetically an ordinary Earthling. She said that she checked just in case when she had the opportunity. Then she added that he had passed the preliminary selection and that their civilization had not changed yet. The girl said that no one should worry. These changes will come to their civilization over time. The first law of civilization rise was that a member of a civilization wins a battle and rises one rank higher. The second law of civilization rise is that the rest of the citizens of his civilization cannot rise immediately. The third law of civilizational advancement is that a representative of a civilization maintains his place in the ranking and gradually raises the rank of his civilization. The girl said if we talk briefly about all this, the more the Earthling team will win the battle, the more likely it is beyond the scientific knowledge of the modern Earth, and this can only help them in their civilization. Ultimately, as a result of this, it will be possible to find a new medicine that will save all of humanity. Ultimately, the goal of this training is to harness Jinwall's power, including all the limitations he had. At that moment, the same journalist who was watching everything that was happening in the arena intervened in their conversation and asked if it wasn't strange, after which he greeted them and said that he was an ordinary space journalist and he wanted to watch one of the players. The leader said that this was the most ordinary adult representative of the Inferior race. Marcel asked her again. The girl explained that these are the most vile creatures. They use these pens to look inside the heads of their interlocutors. This journalist thought that she was very well prepared, and she knows absolutely everything about them. The girl looked at this journalist and asked what was so strange about his unexpected appearance on this training ground. The journalist answered her that there was nothing strange about it, but the only strange thing here was her explanation that she gave. The journalist added that the limits of this Earthlings are not at the level of the first civilization, they are closest to the third. That's why their situation will look something like this. From now on, Jinwall became their representative, and they got such a chance. The journalist wanted to come up and look at the guy who was lying on the floor. He said that there was not even a hint of this, and they themselves do not even know whether he actually has any relation to them. The girl didn't understand why this journalist was really here and what else he wanted to tell them. When the journalist approached the guy lying on the floor, he asked her how about him finding out his true identity with the help of the object he was holding and telling them. So it was possible to find out all his secrets that could not be found out scientifically, Marcel approached his opponent and put his hand on his shoulder. He blocked the journalist's path. He said that they do not trust this journalist as a representative of Euphoria. The first thing that came to this journalist's mind was to maybe take them to a place where the suppressor could be removed and that could solve their problem. Then he thought about it and decided that no, he shouldn't do it. It's better not to make too much noise, and there's still plenty of time. The journalist said that maybe they were right. You can't trust the first alien you meet. But if they want to know his real identity, they should give him a sign at any time, and he will be able to tell them. The journalist stopped and then added that he had a lot of questions for this Earthling, and he also wanted to get answers to them. After which this journalist walked into their training room unnoticed and left it just as unnoticed. Marcel asked the leader Lena what she thought about what the journalist said. Was it true or not? The girl replied that it was some kind of nonsense just to find out more information about their player from them. In fact, they have no other choice. She added that hope dies last. They will have to force their representative to win the next battle by any means necessary. After only 15 days, the voice of the commentator who gathered people in the arena said that they were starting the second round of the qualifying competition of the 8th district. The commentator added that the first fighter is a representative of the civilization ranked 5,830th. The commentator also added that this representative passed the first round of the competition in a matter of minutes without any difficulty. It was a mysterious representative who has the ability to control his cosmic energy, and he was already in the arena. The commentator also added that this representative stands guard over his planet with the ability to take energy from 400,000 of his fellow citizens. And this was a representative of the planet Transferi Birkin. His name was Birkin. This planet was of the second rank. The commentator of this fight said that the viewers should just look at this player. He had huge force suppressors on him. At that moment, this player Birkin made one sharp movement and in one moment removed all the power suppressors that were on his body. The commentator said that in our stadium there is a beast that has tens of 1 billion units of extraordinary power. The leader and her assistant stood and watched everything that was happening on this arena. The assistant said that outwardly, this guy who was in the arena was very striking. The leader, Lena, answered him that he should not worry because they are not bad either. Then the young man looked at her and asked what she was talking about. The girl answered that he would soon see everything for himself. At that moment, the commentator said that his opponent should now enter this arena, and it will be a representative of the civilization that was at the very bottom. But the strength of spirit with which he defeated the greatest blacksmith of the entire universe, Twinkus, amazed and surprised everyone. At that moment, Sinvol entered the arena with a stick and a broken arm. The commentator even laughed. He didn't understand what kind of joke this was. How could this be? Because the opponent comes out in a very bad condition. Leader Lena smiled at this moment and said that their representative was also as eye-catching as the previous guy. Her deputy, when he saw who would represent their planet, had serious doubts about his abilities. He turned and shouted at her, "Why do this to representatives of their planet?" The girl told him not to worry for him, such damage is just a piece of cake. In fact, it was exactly like that when he took a few steps into this arena. He felt himself strong. The restrictions that were placed on his hand began to crack right before everyone's eyes. He has already taken the next step. He did it with a great hand, and without relying on a stick. The commentator said that the fighter representing the Earthlings got rid of the suppressor of force and burst into this battle. Marcel, observing the representative of the Earth, said that it was an amazing power with which he entered this arena. He even shouted for Jinwal to hear so that he could show the results of their training. At that moment, Jinwal was thinking about only one thing. How dare those damn bastards who chained him humiliate his body like that? He thought that he would definitely finish them off. But first he had to deal with these monsters as they had agreed.